Everyone to my medieval cooking party. I am the creative Contessa, and today we're going to be once more returning to the kitchens of 15th century Italy to explore some delicious Italian cuisine as it was before the Columbian Exchange. I apologize for the 15-minute delay in starting. We received a very unexpected phone call that really set us behind this morning. So nothing bad, just, family stuff. You know how that can go sometimes. So that's why there was a slight delay in commencing. But today we are continuing in the theme of egg dishes because it is Lent, everyone. We are now in a fasting season, and this is one of the few medieval fasting seasons that has survived into the modern era. I just have to retie this. So Lent is the period between Carnivale and Easter, basically, that reflects the 40 days and 40 nights of Jesus wandering in the desert. And so this is a period during which good Catholics now, or Christians, period, in the Middle Ages would actually engage in a 40-day and 40-night period of fasting. And fasting doesn't necessarily mean what you think it does. It doesn't mean eating nothing. What fasting in the medieval period meant was eating certain things or avoiding certain things. One of these certain things to be avoided was meat. You could eat fish. Fish doesn't count as meat, apparently, even though it is the flesh of the fish that we are eating. And so there are a number of dishes in medieval cookbooks that are aimed at the Lenten period and the many other days of fasting that there were on the medieval calendar, because there were also Imber days, and there were days like, for example, Wednesday is an Imber day. Or Wednesday is a day when you are supposed to go to confession, so you're supposed to fast on that day. Also, fasting, by the way, was supposed to include abstinence from sexual activity. Yeah, so there are many, many days. I think I once calculated that there's some like 180 days of the medieval calendar during which people were supposed to fast, to eat food that was appropriate to consume on these days when we're supposed to eat in a particularly modest and humble manner, where we are supposed to live an ascetic lifestyle so that we can get closer to God. And a big deal there was actually avoiding dairy products as well as meat. And so that's why almond milk was a really big part of the medieval diet for those who could afford almond milk anyway. And there's a lot of substitutions in recipes for meat. So sometimes you'll find a recipe for something like a meat pie, and then it will say, but if you want to make it for a fasting day, then use fish instead. Or if you want to make it on a fasting day, then use almond milk instead. So we will be making a dish today that is basically a medieval deviled egg. It's and what is a deviled egg? So in my definition, a deviled egg is an egg that is hard boiled and the yolks are taken out. They are mixed with various ingredients to give it a different flavor and texture, and then that is stuffed back into the egg white. But what's interesting about today's recipe is that it's a two-tier process. So we boil the eggs, we take the egg yolks out, we mix it with some flavoring ingredients, we put it back into the white, we fry it, and then over top of that gets poured what is a second egg mixture that's cooked on top of the stuffed eggs that have been fried. And then that is all served up. So that just sounds like a really sophisticated take on deviled eggs. And I just had to explore this recipe with you all. Also, I love eggs. We are an egg heavy household. So yeah, I don't know about you, but eggs for the win, everyone. Your Gamora brings out the green of your eyes so excellently. Yeah, I have hazel eyes, so whatever color I'm wearing, if I wear blue, then they become blue. If it's green, then they become green. Yeah. So yeah, welcome everyone. Today's recipe comes, once again, we're returning to Registrum Coccinae, a cookbook composed by Johannes von Bockenheim. He was a member of the court of Martin V, who was the final pope that ended the schism in Rome, and he dedicated his life to rebuilding the church, and also he was a big patron of arts and culture, so that would include food. And apparently Johannes von Bockenheim was a student of the famous Messer Martino, the original Jacques Pepin of Italy, basically. And he, learned at the hands of this master cook, and many of his recipes, some of his recipes come from that tradition. But what's interesting about Registrum Coquine is that it is presented as a kind of encyclopedia of dishes from all over Europe, because many of these dishes will say something along the lines of meat pie that is good for the Italics, meat pie that is good for the Allemans, meat pie that is good for the Burgundians. And he's actually weirdly using old Latin terms for the Germanic tribes that, migrated to Europe back towards the end of the Roman Empire. So it's really a little interesting that he's using these terms that really haven't been used by anyone in a very long time. So it's linguistically, it's a little fascinating to me. The other interesting thing about it is that he includes recipes he claims are good for peasants, for people across the socioeconomic spectrum. So if you're looking for documentation of what kinds of recipes peasants ate, the Registrum Coquine actually has such recipes. Now, what I haven't been able to verify, and I don't know if anyone has been able to verify, we can't necessarily know whether what he claims was actually for a peasant or eaten by peasants, whether it was actually eaten by the peasantry, this recipe, this dish that results from this particular recipe. We don't know. It would be very hard. It's very hard to corroborate that. But you can look at the ingredients in the recipe, you can look at the techniques that are used, and you can come up with a pretty well-reasoned guess of, well, yes, this is likely to have been something that was consumed by peasants, or no, this is very unlikely to have been something that could have been consumed by peasants. And peasants in this case is farmers. These are, when I use the word peasant here, I'm talking about agricultural workers, right? And that could be anything from someone who works for another peasant and gets paid to help with the harvest, or that could be a land-owning peasant who owns his own farms and actually has a whole host of employees. So the word peasant is not a socioeconomic status, it's a job description. And just like in any field, there are people who earn very little in the field, and there are people who earn a lot. So just keep that in mind with heavy words like peasants. Okay, let's see, who is with us? Jamaican meat pies, Mongolian hushuri yum. Yeah, meat pies for the win. That's the other thing. Registrum Coquine has a lot of meat pie recipes. A lot. It's very meat pie heavy. So yeah, if you like meat pies, this might be an interesting dish or an interesting book to check out. I posted pictures of it and posted pictures of the recipe for my channel members, my patrons, and my subscribers on Facebook. So if you check out those posts, you can actually see the recipe from which we're working today. So I would like to say that today's recipe, Johannes von Bockenheim is writing in a macaronic Latin. So we think this cookbook probably dates to the 1420s, kind of when it's been dated based on the references he makes in the work and, the dates that we know when certain people lived or reigned. So it's kind of been dated to the 1420s, and this is Rome. So he's working at the papal court. That doesn't mean all these recipes reflect Roman dishes. As I said, he actually, for some of them, he says, and this is good for the Hungarians, and this is good, or the Magyars, he might even say, and this is good for the Franks. So these aren't necessarily all dishes that are Roman in nature, but he is working in Rome, and he's composing this in Rome at the time. And the book, Registrum Coquine. And the recipe that we're doing today is actually called stuffed eggs for monks and religieuses. So people who are somehow parts of the religious community, right? So that could be priests, that could be nuns, that could be canons, right? There's this whole host of people in the Middle Ages who were living a religious lifestyle, and literally that weren't necessarily monks, that didn't fall into the more limited categories that we generally have these days for a religious life, right? So this is apparently, according to Master Johannes, this is a dish that would be suitable for such people. Now, again, we don't know if that means that only they would eat such a dish. I highly doubt it. This could have been a way for him to generate interest in his work, right? This could have been a way for him to get a variety of people to want to read his work and or to hire him for their respective communities. You know, we don't actually know really what the purpose of such a compilation was. Right, there's 2 manuscripts. There's 2, as far as I know, there's 2 manuscripts that have survived of the Registrum Coquine. Most of the recipes overlap, but there is a slight variation between which recipes are included. And in this particular edition, it's referred to as Manuscript A and Manuscript B. And there's also some slight variations in the recipes themselves. There's also some cases where recipe in manuscript A is clearly missing words, and the recipe in manuscript B happily includes them. So, you know, this is one of the valuable aspects of looking into the primary sources and actually comparing them, because sometimes copyists, especially medieval copyists, he actually has a recipe for copyists in this book, by the way. Medieval copyists were not necessarily the best. They didn't necessarily have the best eye for detail. And frequently, I think they actually fell asleep while copying a text. And they would wake up. I think I can actually imagine them like snort, startling themselves back awake again. And they would wake up after having startled themselves awake and realize that they fallen asleep, and they would just pick up where they think they left off, but their eyes would jump a line. And so they would miss an entire line of text. Studying medieval dance manuals, 15th century dance manuals, you see it all the time. So, and that's my theory, is that they fell asleep, they nodded off, and they didn't pay attention to what they were doing, and they didn't bother to quality check their work. There was no quality control for these manuscripts, as far as I can tell. As long as it looked good, sometimes you doubt that people ever actually read them, that they were just these beautiful books that sat on a shelf, and no one ever really took a closer look at them. So, because of, she's like human error, and also like handwriting issues. So frequently the way a text like this would be written into a beautifully calligraphed edition is that the original author, say Johannes Bockenheim, might actually write up a manuscript, the meaning of that, just a handwritten text, a handwritten rough draft, basically, or a handwritten draft. And he would pass that off to a copyist or a scribe, who would then scribe it out in this beautiful, very neat handwriting, you know, this beautiful calligraphy, maybe with some illuminated capitals. And what that means is that unless Master Johannes, in this case, actually proofread the text after it was finished, there could be all kinds of errors. And it could be an error of understanding. Literally, the scribe handwriting can be real rough in any era. And I've seen some 15th century handwriting that will make you despair. So I can absolutely imagine the scribe sitting there looking at Master Johannes's chicken scratch and saying to himself, I don't get paid enough to actually go seek him out and get him to tell me what he really meant. I'm just going to do the best that I can, right? There's always that, you know, how dedicated would a scribe be to getting it exactly right? It depends on how much they're getting paid. And I suspect they weren't necessarily getting paid enough to care. So that can also be an issue in these manuscripts. And so because it's really excellent then when we have at least two versions, the more versions you have, the more likely you are to get a full and accurate picture of a recipe or a dance, for instance. In this case, we have 2. So that's better than none, or better than only 1, I guess. Yeah, okay. Comments. Oh, I see. Kevin, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Tomikor, wonderful to see you. Thank you for joining us again. Let me see. Good. Oh, Haas, hello, good to see you. Sorry, I missed some comments. They all just came in at once. Cool suit. Cool suit, thank you. This is a 15th century, move this over to here. This is a 15th century Florentine, 1470s to 1490s. So yes, I made it myself, all myself. I made the pattern for it. I made this one I made 25 years ago. So it's one of my oldest pieces actually, and it's still going strong. So that is what we are going to be making today. Now, I did read the recipe at least through to decide that I wanted to make it. But we're going to be making some of the decisions about how to reconstruct this recipe together, right? So even though I have read it, I haven't really thought too closely about things like quantities. And the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to read the whole recipe to you. In the English translation, it is written in a macaronic Latin that is really garbage. And I'm not going to butcher and I wouldn't butcher it, but I don't really feel like working through his bad grammar Latin. So we're going to work with the translation. The problem with this book is that the person who did the translation into English is not a native English speaker. And so sometimes there are some funky things. Happily, my macaronic Latin, because I have a basis in Romance languages, is strong enough that I can look back at the Latin and go, that's not a correct translation. So that's another problem with working with these medieval texts, is that if you don't actually speak, read, and or write the original source text language, you're going to be working from someone else's translation, and that means you're going to be possibly dealing with their misinterpretations of the original text. So yeah, that's one of the reasons that historians are so important, and that historians who actually speak these languages or understand these dead languages are actually still very important to the study of our past. Okay, so the recipe: stuffed eggs for monks and members of the religious community by Johannes von Bockenheim. To prepare different eggs for the religieuses, take eggs and hard boil them. Shell and cut them in half, pounding the yolks with parsley, marjoram, other good herbs, and spices, and then stuff the white with this mixture. After that, take butter or oil and hot water. Place the eggs into the liquids, then mix raw eggs with verjuice, wine, parsley, and saffron, and pour this mixture above the stuffed eggs, boiling all the ingredients. The end. Okay, if you're enjoying this, please double tap that screen and consider subscribing. Ryan, you might have to set you'll have to go and change all the settings, by the way.
Which settings?
For this live stream go to studio.
And studio.
Yeah. Add the monetization settings, mid-roll ads, and also that only subscribers can comment. Okay, yeah. Let me see. Okay, so first thing we're going to do, we have our eggs in this beautiful replica Majolica bowl by White Hart Pottery. They're not a channel sponsor, but if you can check out White Hart Pottery's stuff, absolutely do. We love their work. It's gorgeous. So the first thing we're going to do then is we're going to boil our eggs. We're going to set the eggs to boil. So medieval cookware was clay. You had clay and you had metal pots. There were cast metal pots in this era. So we had clay, we had metal pots. We're going to be working with a clay pot. My medieval cookware, my replica medieval cookware, is in storage in Mississippi. We're currently in a vacation apartment in Daegu, South Korea. So we're going to be using a traditional Korean clay pot that is very, very, very similar to the medieval pots, the pots that they had in 15th century Italy. I'm indoors. I'm not going to light a fire for you in the middle of this kitchen floor. So we're going to be using a modern stove, but where I can, we will be using medieval techniques. And that part of that is the fusion approach, is using a clay pot instead of a metal pot. So the thing about clay pots is that once they heat up, they stay warm for a while. They take a little longer to heat up, but they retain their heat for a good long time. So we're going to actually do a bunch of eggs because I don't know about you, but I love eggs. And I like to have some boiled eggs in the fridge for emergency egg purposes, for emergency protein consumption. So we're going to go ahead and just boil however many eggs fits comfortably in this pot. Yeah, that looks good. So we're going to boil 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 eggs. 10 eggs. And when you boil eggs, for those who don't know, you should put them in the pot, add water, and then put them on the stove. Do not put eggs, cold eggs especially, into a pot of roiling water. You will probably end up with exploded eggs. Just putting that out there. So I'll just pop here to the well in the back of my kitchen and run some water over this. And then we'll put this on the stove, and I will very, very cleverly light this fire with my flint and steel. I actually do know how to use a flint and steel. I haven't used one in a while, so my skills are probably really rusty, but I do have a replica flint and steel kit, medieval one with char cloth and everything. It's really great. It's really, there's very little as satisfying to me as successfully lighting a fire using my medieval flint and steel kit, really. Yeah, I love the clay plots are really quite excellent. Yeah.
I tagged them.
Thank you, Hanson. Oh, you tagged their clay pots have been tagged?
8 clay pots.
There's if you're interested in buying your own clay pot, and you want easy access rather than having to go to a medieval market and buy one, there is a clay pot tagged in the products for this live stream. Yep. How many homes had well water near or in the kitchen? Herb Queen, that is an excellent question. In the kitchen, like none. Very few. Very few would have had a water supply in the kitchen, at least in terms of a well. However, by the 15th century, many grand homes actually had plumbing with running water. Little known fact. And I don't mean, I mean in Italy, I mean in France, the Tower of London has had running, had running water, at least at the end of in the 13th century, running water was installed. I think John actually had running water installed in the Tower of London. It might have actually been Edward I. But anyway, 13th century, the Tower of London had hot and cold water on tap. So in the Palazzo d'Avanzati, which by the way, on this channel, if you want to check that tour out, I have a really fun video about the Palazzo d'Avanzati in Florence. The Palazzo d'Avanzati is a gorgeous 15th or 14th century palazzo in Florence that was not updated. So it was not Renaissanceified the way the Palazzo Medici, the Palazzo Strozzi, right? All those grand big square piles were built in the Palazzo Pitti that were built that were expanded in the 15th and 16th century. The Palazzo d'Avanzati is still basically a tower palazzo. And it still has its gorgeous 14th century frescoes. They've been restored. And it has a central well in the middle of this palazzo. That seems to have been common in Italy, in Florence at any rate. That seems to have been very common, that every palazzo did have its own well. And there's actually a system in the center of the Palazzo d'Avanzati whereby there's a central water system, like a dumbwaiter, but for water. So there's actually a rope that runs all the way, a very good rope that runs all the way down through all 8 stories. I mean, there's only five or 6 floors, but the floors are really tall, they have tall ceilings, so it's a pretty tall building. And the well bucket runs all the way through all of the floors, going all the way up with a stop on every single floor, all the way up to the kitchen, which is on the top. Of course, the kitchen is on the top in an Italian palazzo because no one wants to burn up the whole palazzo if the kitchen catches on fire. So what that meant is that every single floor of the Palazzo d'Avanzati had access to fresh water from the well. And it's still there. The system is still there. You can still see it to this day. It's really fantastic. The Palazzo d'Avanzati also has bathrooms. And I mean that, a room for both relieving yourself and for bathing on every single floor. Really sophisticated stuff. Yeah. Excuse me, I have to cough. I don't know why I turned away. I'm mic'd up.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a very good question, Herb Queen. Thank you for asking. Yeah. Don't forget to double tap that screen if you're enjoying, everyone. Okay, so our eggs are boiling, and that's going to take a few minutes. See earlier comment about clay pot. Clay pots take longer to heat up, but once they're heated up, they're good to go for quite a while. Okay, so let's look back at our recipe and see the other steps that go beyond just the hard boiling, what ingredients we might need to prepare. So the first step of this 2-stage medieval Italian deviled egg recipe it involves parsley, marjoram, other good herbs, and spices. Okay, so let's talk about a couple of things there. Parsley, if you go with parsley. If you have parsley, you want, or you have the choice of parsleys, you want flat leaf parsley. That's really, it's the most flavorful. It's also the kind of parsley that they had in 15th century Italy. This morning, I actually stumbled across a beautiful herbal from 15th century Italy that has gorgeous illustrations of so many different plants. And it's so fascinating to see how different the cultivars are of the 15th century variety of, say, onion versus the modern onion. Like almost, you would almost not recognize it as being an onion, for instance. So there was a really beautiful book. I shared that in my Creative Contessa Discord, which is one of the perks of patronage and channel membership. And Facebook membership. I shared the link for that. It's actually not only available in digital format or digital search on the website, you can also download the whole damn thing as a PDF. What a world. What a wonderful world. But this is really important. When we are exploring historic recipes, it's very important that we consider the differences between the medieval version of the ingredient and the modern version, whether it's cheese or herbs or even onions. Now, you may or may not be able to accommodate that difference. Like you might not live in a place where you can get access to an heirloom cultivar of onions, for instance, and that's fine. I'm not saying that you must have exactly the right ingredients or you can't do it. But we should still think about it, and we should consider to ourselves how that would impact the recipe, how it would impact the texture and the flavor, maybe even the cooking time. So, you know, I always try to think about that when I'm looking at these recipes. And there it is. I just realized I looked at myself and realized I can see my skirts. Apron. Aprons in the Middle Ages, unless you were actually a midwife, it seems that aprons were waist aprons. Midwives, depictions of midwives in the 15th century show them with these total body aprons that cover their entire garment. And that makes sense because childbearing is a real messy process. But if you see depictions of people cooking, they only have waist aprons. So that kind of also tells us something about the kind of equipment with which they were working, and what I would call the splatter radius seems to have been mostly waist down. Otherwise, if it had been a real issue, they would have an apron that would cover their upper body as well. But that's because, especially in 15th century Italy, the hearths are low generally, they're on the ground. And so you're actually standing up using a really long handled spoon, not really close to the thing. So the part of your garment that's really going to get splattered is the skirt, not your chest. So these are other things to think about, right? When you're exploring historical recipes, what was the setup of their kitchen, of their cooking space, right? Where was the stove? We all assume now that stoves are here more or less, you know, at a kind of waist level, but that's not true pre-modern in Europe, and not even in Korea either. The actual cooking, that kind of cooking is done low on a hearth that's on the ground almost. Okay, comments or questions? Yeah, paprika is not medieval. Medieval is not at all paprika, or paprika is not at all medieval. I don't even think they had paprika in Central and South America in the Middle Ages, because I haven't read anything about them drying the skin of the capsicum and grinding it into a powder, because that's what paprika is. Paprika doesn't exist in medieval Europe. Peppers are part of the Columbian Exchange, and we've talked about the Columbian Exchange, right? The Columbian Exchange is the process by which food products, many products from the Americas came to Eurafrica, Asia, and products from Eurafrica, Asia went to the Americas. And capsicum, all the peppers are from the Americas. And so they don't exist in Europe before the 16th century. And people didn't eat them at first because they thought, what the hell is wrong with this vegetable that it hurts so bad? They thought they were pretty. So in the 16th century, pepper plants and tomato plants were ornamental. Right. Yeah. So that's a good question. I figured it wasn't super old, but it's one of my favorites. Yeah. It's now like the Spanish and the Hungarians adopted it first. They adopted it first, and then other people kind of sort of followed, but they didn't jump on it right away. Let me see.
He is so right about that.
Yeah, so Nevis makes a good comment. Black pepper is not at all related to capsicum, to chili peppers. And my theory about why we called chili peppers is because black pepper, if you bite into a clove, or if you bite into a black peppercorn, which by the way is a berry, bet y'all didn't know that. Peppercorns are a berry. If you bite into a peppercorn, it will light some things up in your mouth, shall we say. And so when they brought chilies over, I'm confident that someone said, wow, this is a little bit like black pepper. The effect is a little bit like black pepper. And so chili pepper was born. That's a theory. That's conjecture. It's a hypothesis, not even a hypothesis. It's conjecture on my part. But that would make sense to me. Having bitten into many a peppercorn fresh, it can definitely set a fire to your mouth. A pleasant one, but a fire nevertheless. Yeah.
Say hi to Mary Kukura. She's a new member.
Oh, Mary Kukura?
Yeah.
Mary
It doesn't come up in your chat.
Oh, it doesn't. Okay. Mary Kukura, welcome. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for being a member. Really appreciate your support.
Sorry if I'm not saying it right.
Yeah. Yeah, black pepper is actually a creeper. Peppercorns come from a creeper. They're a vine, and they're, an invasive vine that grows originally in Sri Lanka, and it also does well in parts of India, parts that are like Sri Lanka climate-wise, and South Asia. And they actually, it's the berries of this creeper vine that are the reason they're black is they're literally sunburnt. They're put in the sun, and the UV light turns them black, and they get hard. But before that, they're actually green and dry, and they're kind of berry-like, in terms of their texture. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do with the parsley is I'm just going to cut off all these stems. And the stems I sometimes save for using in broth, right? But the stems, most of these stems are way too woody to go into food. They will actually end up being chewy and stringy and very unpleasant texture-wise. So I always cut off my stems, and then I actually have a bowl of cuttings in my freezer, and I put all the cuttings, carrots and onions and things like that, stems of parsley, into the bowl. And then when I go to make broth, a godabrota, as it's called in 15th century English, then I break these back out and I toss them in my stock pot. So that's a sustainability tip from me. So I'm now going to wash this because it hasn't been washed, and I noticed that there's actual dirt on the stems of this parsley. So not only should we be concerned about chemical pesticides and fertilizers, we don't want dirt in our food. We really don't. It's there is little, to me, more disgusting food-wise in terms of gustatory matters than to take a bite of something and to have the grit of sand grinding across my teeth. No. That's a hard no for me. Some of you have heard this story, but I'll share it again. You've heard my story about the first time I made chicken pot pie myself, all by myself. And I was so excited to use leeks. I'd never cooked with leeks before. I was like 18, I think. I'd never cooked with leeks before. And I was just making this recipe. I was just making it myself. I wasn't following a recipe, so there were no instructions. And it didn't occur to me how dirty leeks actually are. So I rinsed the outside off, but I did not do a thorough washing after I sliced those babies up. And there was so much sand in the bottom of this otherwise amazing chicken pot pie. I was so sad. I was so sad. All that work done. There was no saving it. There was no saving any of it. So and it was a big pie, because when I bake or cook for myself, I generally like to make a large amount, and then I pop it in the fridge, and that becomes my, meals, multiple meals for the next week or more. Yeah. Oh, Szechuan peppercorn is also not pepper. Szechuan peppercorns are actually a prickly ash. And they are, also not peppercorns either, and not chili peppers. I love Szechuan pepper. Love prickly ash. Oh my God, it's one of my favorite spices. Okay, so yeah, when you are using fresh fruits and vegetables, make sure you wash them. Yeah, no, prickly. The thing I like about prickly ash, you're right, it's not as intense as black pepper. White pepper is also more mild. Prickly ash, I describe prickly ash as more of a sensation. Like it has a citrusy kind of flavor if you're talking about the pure flavor, but for me, prickly ash is more a sensation. it's the feeling of 1,000 joyful bees lightly stinging the inside of your mouth. Right? It makes your tongue and the lining of your mouth sort of sing. Right? That's how I describe prickly ash. I love it. And I only discovered prickly ash, Szechuan peppercorns 5 or 6 years ago on accident. 2018. Right? I went to Japan. And we went, by the way, they smoke in restaurants in Japan. Yeah, it sucks. Anyway, we went to lunch. I was there with 2 friends. We went to lunch, and it was the kind of restaurant, it was in Osaka. It was one of those restaurants where there was nothing written in any language that I can read. And I can read about 8 different languages. There were pictures, though. There were pictures on the wall. And so I pointed at this yummy looking tofu stew thing. In a clay pot, actually. So that looks really good. I'll have that. And they brought it out, and it was covered, and I mean a solid layer all the way across the top of the entire bowl of this ground up powder. Like, okay, whatever. Stirred it in, started eating it, and then I started getting scared because my mouth was starting to tingle a lot, and I worried that I was about to go into anaphylactic shock. I thought I was suffering from anaphylaxis. And I said to my companions, I think I'm allergic to something in this soup. And they said, oh no, that's the Szechuan peppercorn. It's supposed to do that. I'm like, so my throat isn't going to close. I'm not going to stop breathing here in a moment. They said, oh no, it's fine. It's part of the experience. It's like, oh, okay. So once I relaxed into not the idea that I wasn't dying, I was able to fully enjoy the joys of the prickly ash, the Szechuan peppercorns. And now I have a giant jar of them, and I buy them wholesale, and I have a giant jar of them in my spice cabinet. I'll have to show you my spice cabinet sometime. It's really nice. Not right now, it's a mess. We tore it apart looking for everything we needed. Yeah. Yeah, anise and Szechuan peppercorns make your mouth comfortably numb. Yeah, they really do. Okay, I'm gonna call that pretty good with this parsley. Here we go. Okay, great. Okay, so let's look at our recipe. Parsley is flat parsley is also called Italian parsley sometimes, is absolutely the right kind of parsley for a medieval recipe. We actually have depictions of parsley from the 14th and 15th century in Italy, and it looks pretty unchanged. So yay. So the next herb that we're going to be using, it actually calls for it, is marjoram. And I'm going to be using the dry marjoram because it's the early March here, and we definitely cannot get fresh marjoram. I don't know if I even could get fresh marjoram here in Korea, but that's okay, because in the medieval world, they absolutely use dried spices. Parsley is actually one of those plants that will keep going. It will not stop growing. It'll grow through the winter if the winter isn't too harsh. So it is actually feasible that they could have had fresh parsley in Italy, whereas they might not have in the middle of winter, or the end of winter in this case, whereas they might not have had fresh other herbs. So it's actually feasible that a medieval cook would have used a combination of dried and fresh herbs, as we're doing today. So here we've got marjoram, and you're going to say, well, it looks like every other green dried herb. Yeah, I know. But marjoram, it's a green leaf, right? And it's one of these really old herbs. It's a weed originally, and it's used all over Europe. Medieval Europe especially. It's not used as much in modern cuisine anymore. In the US, it's mostly only used at Thanksgiving and Christmas, but I always have some. So we're gonna use marjoram, and I don't know how to describe it. It's kind of lightly sweet, notes of bitterness, and it has a very round green smell. Yeah, that's how I would describe it. Then it says, it specifies parsley and marjoram and then other good herbs. So what are some other good herbs that they could have in 15th century Italy? Some of sorrel is one, burnet is one, rocket is one. They could also have roux or penny royale was also used in cuisine. Summer savory is another one. And I do happen to have a whole jar of summer savory in my spice cabinet. So summer savory, there's also winter savory. Summer savory is a weed. It's a green plant. It grows in southern Europe, in Italy, and going further, the like Italy eastward, in places that are kind of warmish, mild, temperate climates. You can get summer savory. So we're going to be using summer savory, marjoram, and our parsley. And you know, some other herbs that we could also use if I decide, and I have some back here, we might do it. Sage, rosemary. These are all other options as well. And I do happen to have sage and rosemary back there. So depending on how herbal you want this to be, you could actually give this a really sophisticated flavor profile. And to that point, this dish is absolutely something that could be made by anyone. This is not to this point, with just these herbs in it, this is not a rich person's dish. This isn't any person's dish, because everyone across the entire socioeconomic spectrum could find herbs. These herbs were weeds. They grew everywhere. You would just go out to the fields or the forest, and you could pick the edge of the forest, rather, or a clearing in the forest, and you could pick them. People also had herb gardens. Peasants, of course, had herb gardens. Castles had herb gardens. Palazzi had herb gardens, sometimes on the roof, sometimes in an inner courtyard, right? So green herbs were not particularly special. They were omnipresent and everyone could get them. Now, when we get to the spices, then it starts getting questionable as to what socioeconomic status one would have to have in order to have these spices, right? So let's go ahead and talk about our spices. So what it says is, it says good herbs and spices. Yay. Thank you, Johannes, for being so specific. Now, obviously, someone who lived in 15th century Rome would have had this dish, or 15th century Italy even, would have had this dish, and they would have an idea of the kinds of flavors it should have, because they have already eaten this dish. We, on the other hand, have never eaten this dish. We are not 15th century Italians or people living in the papal court in the first half of the 15th century. So we have to then make an educated guess of what kind of spices would be appropriate, right? So spices that could be appropriate especially in the papal court, are actually pretty huge range, a bigger range of spices than is certainly used in Europe these days. And even larger than is used in most places in the world these days. So medieval spices that could have happened, could have existed, could have been used here. Cinnamon. Yeah. And this is cinnamomum verum. This is Ceylon cinnamon. This is not Chinese cinnamon. It's not Vietnamese cinnamon. It's not Saigon cinnamon. Those are all cassia. This is cinnamomum verum. And you can tell that it is true cinnamon because you can see that mille-feuille effect of all the layers of bark that have been stuffed into each other to create these long sticks that are then chopped up, right? This is the stuff that has the good health benefits. Cassia is the solid roll that doesn't have lots of layers. That does not have the same health benefits that cinnamomum verum has. So, and interestingly, medieval recipes will call for both. They will call for cassia and they will call for cinnamon. So they understood that there was a difference. They didn't think of them as being the same. So keep that in mind when you're cooking historically or modernly. So comes in a stick form. We'll be grinding it, of course, in our mortar and pestle. Ginger. Ginger was absolutely the most common spice. Called for, even more common than black pepper, right? Absolutely the most common spice in recipes. If you've read through all the recipes that have survived the Middle Ages and counted the number of incidences of ginger, it will be massive. Ginger was the go-to spice of medieval cuisine. Now this is powdered ginger. Our recipe doesn't call for it and it just says spices. And I've had some people argue that, say in places like England, they never had access to fresh ginger. Oh, Oh, but we have evidence that they did. There's a recipe from the 14th century, late 14th century England, that actually calls for you to pare and chop the ginger. You're not going to peel and chop dried ginger. Good luck with that. I've tried it. I have tried to peel dried ginger, chopping it. I've tried to rehydrate it and then peel it. So that for me is evidence that there must have been fresh ginger in even medieval England, because otherwise they wouldn't have a recipe that called for you to peel it and chop it, right? But we're going to go ahead and go with dry because I have so much dry ginger. But for certain in Italy, they absolutely had fresh ginger. There's a 14th century manual on how to be a successful businessman, actually. It's called Mercatura, and it includes, among the many details that includes about doing business in 14th century Italy, it includes the sort of main items that you might end up selling as a good spice merchant. And amongst them are ginger, fresh and powdered. So we could have gone with fresh, but I decided I have powdered. It's easy, it's done. We're just gonna go with powdered for now. But if you were going to use dried ginger, if you're gonna use fresh ginger, it should be pounded in a mortar and pestle, is how it's described as being processed when you get fresh ginger in these recipes. So if you use fresh ginger, that's fine. It's going to create a different flavor profile. It's going to be a lot brighter. Whereas dried ginger is more mustardy in its flavor and the way it will, the impact it will have on your recipe. Okay, question. Are you a historian too? Owen, all around, I am. What do you mean by am I a historian? Am I someone who studies history? Yes. Do I refer to primary sources? Do I read original manuscripts? Do I write papers? Yes. Do I have a PhD? No. So I guess it depends on what you mean by are you a historian? Let me see. I've peeled dry ginger, pain in the ass in lots of ways though. Yes, exactly. It's horrible. Peeling dry ginger is the most inefficient thing and it's a pain in the ass. And think about peeling dry ginger using your average medieval utility knife. They didn't have peelers. You're not going to spoon peel dry ginger. It's not going to happen. Yep. Blut Axt Malta, welcome. Lovely to see you again. Let me see. Oh, thyme. Susan says thyme. Yes, thyme would also be a green herb option for certain. Okay, moving on. So those are the spices I think we're going to use today, but other spices we could use if we wanted to get really excited with this. Grains of paradise, cubebs, cinnamon blossoms, long pepper. We will be using pepper. I've got some pepper that I've already ground here. This is actually white pepper. Yep. Cubebs, long, there's so many more spices that were used. Galangal, there are so many more spices that were used in medieval European cuisine than are used now. That's when I say modern European cuisine is actually boring, that's what I mean. We have fallen so far from the haute cuisine of the Middle Ages. Yep. Yeah. Yeah, knife, no thank you. Okay, so then our eggs are boiled. I'm going to go ahead and drain these and put some cool water in with them to help encourage, sorry, I didn't realize that the lemon juicer was right there, so that's unfortunate. Yeah, it will need to be rinsed. I'll do it, I'll get it, it's fine. It was right on the edge of the sink though for some reason, which is kind of weird. Okay, so one of the things that this recipe ultimately calls for verjuice. I can't get verjuice here, and I'll talk about that more in a moment when we don't have. So verjuice. Verjuice is the juice of green grapes, and I don't mean green like green sweet grapes. I mean unripe grapes. It is not easy to procure anywhere, really. If you have access to a Middle Eastern grocer, specifically an Iranian one, you might be able to get verjuice in a grocery store. Otherwise, you have to order it online. And I'm currently in Korea, and verjuice is not something I was able to find here. So substitutes for verjuice include things like lemon juice. So we're going to be juicing some lemons today so that we'll be replacing the verjuice with lemon juice. It isn't quite the right flavor profile because verjuice does have a grape flavor, like a natural grape flavor, not that horrible artificial grape flavor that makes me want to throw up, right? But yeah, we'll be using lemon juice because we could use vinegar, but vinegar is more acetic acid and verjuice is more tartaric acid. So the lemons are kind of closer to that. Also, lemon juice is something they did have in medieval Italy. So it is a thing they could have used instead, but pretty much everyone had verjuice in their kitchen. And there's depictions of people harvesting green grapes, unripe grapes, specifically to make verjuice in Taquinem Sanitatis and in other such works on medieval health and also herbals. So you can actually see that process illustrated by the people who actually did it if you look through some of these really fun medieval sources. Yeah, let's see. Yeah, same here. Oh, goodness, there's storms. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry to hear that. Okay, so let us go ahead and chop our parsley while our eggs cool. So you may have noticed something. There are no quantities anywhere in this recipe. For instance, take eggs and hard boil them. How many eggs? Who knows? Shell and pound the yolks with parsley, marjoram, and other good herbs and spices. How much? Who knows? Stuff the eggs with this mixture. Well, you're going to have a set quantity at that point. But then there's the second stage, mix raw eggs. How many? Verjuice, how much? All right, so we'll be making some in my little notebook where I usually take notes on this. If you could grab me one of my little notebooks. Part of the process here is we're experimenting, right? So thankfully, I've been cooking since I was So yeah, my one of my other bazillions of notebooks. Could you get me my little teacup, please? Yeah, so one of the things we're going to be doing is using my 40 years of cooking experience to actually inform our interpretation of this recipe, because I have indeed made many stuffed egg dishes over the course of my life. And so I have kind of a vague idea about, how much herbs and spices should go into this many egg yolks. We'll try to quantify that here, though, a little bit so that afterwards we'll have a recipe that will hopefully be recreatable, reproducible, as they say in the industry. So that brings us to the topic of how much parsley of this parsley should we in fact chop. So parsley actually goes in at 2 stages here. It goes into the stuffing for the eggs, but it also goes into the egg frittata that goes on top of these stuffed eggs. So I'm going to actually just go ahead and chop all the parsley. And any parsley we don't use in this recipe, it will get used elsewhere. So it's not going to go to waste. Now, at the beginning, I did chop off a bunch of the bases of the stems, but we still have some pretty woody stems. And I'm just going to go through now and pick off the ones that evaded my initial chopping. Because again, the texture on those is going to be real unpleasant, even if you chop it. It's going to end up being stringy and very unpleasant in your mouth. But the good thing about this is medieval uses for these stems, this parsley stems, absolutely, they could have used them in a broth like I was talking about. But another thing you can do, you can pound those in a mortar and pestle and you'll get the juice out of it. And that green juice can be used in a variety of, there's a lot of dishes that have parsley juice added to make it green. So I could absolutely see that in a medieval kitchen, they would cut these big woody stems off. It would get passed off to the poor probably boy, maybe girl, and I mean that as in child, who's in charge of pounding everything processing everything in mortars and pestles, the human food processor basically, and just be told pound that until it's basically nothing but juice and pulp, and then strain out the juice, set the juice aside. We'll be using that later today. So that's, I also, when I'm exploring these medieval recipes, that is something I think about. I think about how would the clippings, the choppings, the cast-offs of all of these ingredients have been used, because the medieval world was a circular economy. There is very little that just gets thrown away. Very little. That's why we're excited when we find a midden, a trash pile, a medieval trash pile, and we excavate it, because that's like opening a window into the past, but they're not hugely common relative to the number of people who lived across the 1,000 years that is the Middle Ages. That's because, for the most part, everything got used and used and used until it disappeared, biodegraded, evaporated. So, okay, I've now picked out most of the woody bits. Oh, nope, I missed one. Missed a big one, geez. Music now playing is a 15th century dance, Rostoboli Gioioso, which was indeed danced in the papal court. It was danced all over Italy. It was danced all over Europe, in fact. This dance was danced from Italy all the way up into France and Burgundy, Spain, and up to Scotland. Imagine that, a dance so popular in the 15th century that it made its way from Italy all the way up to Scotland. Really exciting stuff. Which also means Scottish reels are not medieval. A lot of people think they are. Scottish country dancing, they're actually the Scottified version of English country dances, which only date to the 17th century. So I know, it's disappointing for those of you who are big on Scotland forever, but that's not how culture works. Yeah, deviled eggs with hats, basically, yep. Sometimes I will use cilantro stems in chili con carne. Oh, interesting option. Although I think in general, I find that cilantro stems aren't quite as woody as parsley stems are. Are you going to teach Rostoboli Gioioso? I actually have a video, a tutorial on Rostoboli Gioioso. If you'd like to learn the dance, this is not a dance right now. The music that was playing before this. If you would like to learn how to do that dance, I have a 22-minute tutorial from beginning to end with basic footwork on how to do the version for 2 people. It's a charming little flirty dance. I'd say it's an intermediate level dance, especially for people who've never danced before, but everything is explained in the video, and we actually recorded that tutorial in the Renaissance garden that is part of Cheongdok Palace in Seoul. Right? So if you're interested in learning how to do medieval dance, on this very channel, I have dozens, if not hundreds of hours of medieval dance tutorials and dance lesson recordings, etc., etc. Also on my website, thecreativecontessa.com, you can purchase access to entire courses, beginner, intermediate, and advanced medieval dance. And also access to dance drills, which are basically like Pilates, but for dancing, where we actually do exercises for strength and balance and endurance and agility. And we, dance through a variety of combinations of dance steps to try to build a better dancer. Also good for posture, because medieval dance is it's very upright, right? Your shoulders are back, your neck is aligned, right? It's not this, it's this. Yep. Now let me see. There are some traditional Danish tunes that sound indistinguishable from a lot of traditional Irish and Scottish music. Yeah, and I hate to tell you all this, but traditional Irish and Scottish music isn't that old. It just isn't. It's, 18th century is kind of when it makes an appearance. And it's also heavily influenced by 18th century English folk music. Now, the vocalizations, the special vocalizations in Irish music, those vocalizations, that is a technique that I'm pretty certain dates back pretty far. But that's not the same as the tunes that you're talking about. Yeah, remember the word traditional, the second you start talking about traditional music or traditional dance, what is a tradition? A tradition is anything that's done twice. So we should be very careful about not using the word traditional as a synonym for historical, because they're not. I'll give you a good example here in Korea. Korea, they have traditional Korean clothing called hanbok, which literally means Korean clothing. By the way, that's what that word, translation of that word is. The word arose at a time when the Japanese occupied Korea. And when Westernization was happening and people were starting to wear Western style clothing, and so they felt it linguistically necessary to have a term that distinguished clothing based on whether it was Western style clothing or Japanese and Korean. That's where the word hanbok comes from. Before the late 19th century, in Korea, hanbok was just called bok. It was just called clothing. But my point is that if you come to Korea and you go and buy or rent traditional Korean clothing, it may or may not be historical. It might just be a joguri, the bolero light jacket top, and a skirt. That has nothing to do with historic Korean clothing, because traditional clothing in Korea is now modernized. It's now has style, and there's actually trends in traditional Korean clothing. And basically, as far as I can tell, using the phrase traditional Korean clothing in English is just a way of distinguishing Western fashions from these very Korean style fashions, but that doesn't make them historical. I am in the process of doing a lot of research into historical Korean clothing, into historical hanbok. And there are huge differences between what they were wearing in the 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries compared to what hanbok is now. So you can never assume that something that is traditional is historical. Now, they can be, they just aren't necessarily. And in my experience, most things that are traditional aren't as old as people want to think they are. Because humans are creative, humans are curious, humans are always looking for the next new thing. So it doesn't matter if it's something, a traditional folk dance. That doesn't mean it's very old. It just means it's not these days. Something that's folk dance is basically contrasted with ballroom dance, is the contrast there, right? And that doesn't mean it's very old, because even in the folk community, people get bored of doing the exact same choreography over and over and over and over. And then someone comes up with a new thing you can do on that phrase of music. And then that version is the version that gets taught and adopted. So yeah, you just can never assume that traditional is as old as we think it is. Oh, I guess I should have angled that a little bit more so you can see my knife work. Okay, so another thing about the recipe is it didn't even say to chop the parsley. So I'm going with the assumption that the parsley is chopped.
I want giant leaves in my egg.
I'm just, and why? Because this is going to be mixed in with egg yolks or eggs. And so it's going to be stuffed back into an egg. So it should be chopped pretty finely. So yeah, hence we're going with super fine chop. Let's see, Nevis says, Faria Faraji's channel has a lot of material explaining modern versus medieval music. Yeah, and honestly, music starts getting boring in the 16th century. Before that, in Western Europe, medieval music was much more interesting. It wasn't just 4/4, in groups of four It wasn't just music in meter of 4/4 in groups of four, by which I mean 4 bars, phrases of 4 bars, then 4 phrases of 4 bars, then four phrases. It gets really boring. And verse chorus music is really kind of an invention of the 15th century in Europe, and then it really picks up steam heavily in the 16th century. But before that, music was very complicated with all kinds of really interesting meters and phrasing, where you'd have what we would look at as half bars instead of whole bars. And one phrase, you play one phrase, and then the next phrase is 1 measure longer, and then the next phrase is 1 more measure longer, and then you go back to the beginning and play that again. And there's an expectation of a lot of improvisation in medieval music, which is why we generally don't have complex arrangements of music from that era, because musicians just knew how to play. There was a tenor line, a bass tenor line off of which they worked, but musicians knew how to improvise over top of that tenor line. So you don't have detailed arrangements until the 15th century. You might have a melody, right? We might have a single melody that survives, but you don't see complete arrangements until the end of the 15th century, where you see multi-voice arrangements that are notated. So yeah, medieval music, much more complicated, much more interesting, honestly. And I bet a lot of people, if you listened to a lot of medieval music, you would hear it and you would think, wow, that sounds really Middle Eastern. Yeah, it does, doesn't it? Oh, let's see. All right, as much as I love the 16th century, I'll give you this one. Yeah, the music gets real boring. It really does. I mean, it's pretty. It's pretty. And then you have composers like John Dowland, the original emo composer, right, who purposefully composes melodies that are so complex that they can't be danced anymore because you've got a series of 16th and 32nd notes played in chords. Right, but that's kind of the exception. That's not the common music. That's the art music, as it were. John Dowland is the emo musical artist of the 16th century. Right. And he does that because he acknowledges that, wow, this music is getting boring. We need to do something to it to make it more interesting again. Yeah. Let me see. Yeah, 5/4 time is amazing. 9/8 is fun. It really is. Like, there's so many great time signatures that go beyond 3/4, 6/8, and 4/4 and 6/4, which are the 4 time signatures of 15th century dance, by the way. Also 2/4. Yeah. Let me see. Did I miss any comments? I read that harpists held a high status in the courts of Dauriata. Yeah, harpists. So harpists, actually, people associate harpists and harps pretty heavily with Wales and Ireland. But the reality is that up until the 16th century, harpists were held in high regard everywhere. And it was an instrument that was played everywhere. And I don't know why there's a shift. It's a seeming shift in the 16th century. But for certain in Ireland, in medieval Ireland, had a culture, a musical culture that was pretty much the same as everywhere else. It's just that in Ireland, that culture continued of basically a lord having a great hall and inviting a bard or a musician in as an honored guest to perform and allowing them to sit basically with the Lord in the hall, right? Under the understanding that they would perform. Whereas in the rest of Europe, that culture goes away, and instead they just become musicians, just become hired hands who are not particularly well regarded. Necessarily particularly well regarded. Depends, your mileage will vary. There are plenty of courts. There are courts where even in the 15th century, musicians were still highly regarded and very well paid. We have expense accounts detailing special payments, massive payments to musicians, especially around Christmas time.
48 years.
But Ireland definitely has had a music and poetry loving culture that survived past the time when that was fashionable in the rest of Europe. But in medieval Europe, it's like that everywhere. Okay, so here is our pile of parsley. I'm just going to check let's see. Finnish folk metal band Moon Sorrow does a lot of 5/4 that isn't really noticeable, very natural pulse. Yeah, I love Finnish. I love Finnish rock. Anyway. Okay, so we have our parsley. Yes?
Did you get this question?
I don't know.
Did the average medieval woman prepare more food inside or outside her home?
Ah, very interesting question. Question is, did the average medieval woman prepare more food inside or outside her home? So this is where I should probably point out that a lot of most medieval cooks were men. Bet you weren't expecting me to say that. Especially head cooks. The head cooks were nearly always men. Now, if you're talking about, in a peasant household, for instance, or an artisan's household, if they could afford to hire a cook, it was probably a man with women helping. But either way, the question about cooking inside or outside, cooking was nearly always done inside. Nearly always. The only time cooking was done outside and I'm gonna stick to the 15th century on this one just because we're doing a 15th century recipe. The Middle Ages is 1,000 years. Europe is an entire continent. It was not a monolith. So I just want to put that out there. So talking about 15th century, The 15th century, most people are cooking inside. You will have a space. You will have a space for the average person. The great room, the communal room, the main room, was the living space. It was also the cooking space, and there would be a hearth in the middle of the floor usually. Italy is an exception. Italy starts getting actual chimney pieces pretty commonly everywhere in the 14th century. So in Italy, it would be a hearth on the side against the wall, and there would be a kind of hood, the mantle, a hood that would catch the smoke and funnel it out of a chimney. But the cooking would actually be done on the floor. The fire would be like right on the floor, almost with no separation between the floor and the hearth and the floor. And there would be a stand, a tripod, or some kind of nice metal hardware for hanging pots, and also clever ratchets for lowering and raising pots. And there would probably be a kind of gridiron that would be adjustable, and a spit would be a really key component of medieval cooking equipment. And they would have clay pots and sometimes metal pots. And the cauldrons, the metal pots are the ones that could be suspended. The clay pots usually have either 3 legs because they sit over top of the coals, or they would sit on top of a metal tripod. And there were actually some frying pans made of metal and also clay. They're not quite like our frying pans, so they don't have the big sides on them. So they're more like a metal plate with a long metal handle so that you can stand back from the fire. But that would be inside. And there wouldn't necessarily, in your average home, there would not be a separate kitchen. There would be a communal space, the largest room in the house, basically, the room that has the fireplace. And that would be where food is prepared and also where it is eaten. So, but it was inside, definitely inside. Outside cooking was mostly reserved for campaign, for going on campaign. On campaign, they would cook outside. But we have some images of campaign camps, of war camps, that's what I'm looking for, of war camps, where they do actually set up a kind of canopy over top of the cooking area, acknowledging that it could rain and that's going to ruin the fire. It's going to make it so we can't actually cook if the fire goes out. So yeah, that's really the only time cooking was done outdoors. It's always depicted as being indoors anyway. Ovens, though, were separate, right? So ovens were not necessarily, were usually not in the kitchen. Even in the great houses, there's some extant 15th century kitchens in a variety of castles and manor houses across Europe. In Germany, there's the Hohenburg, and that beautiful 14th, 15th century castle, mostly in its 14th, 15th century state, northeast of Frankfurt. You can actually see Frankfurt am Main from the tower. And it has its kitchen. It's a 15th century kitchen, and it doesn't have an oven. So ovens tended to be out in the courtyard or somewhere else. And that could be a fire concern, actually. That, if things went really wrong, that the oven is not inside your home. And your average person did not have an oven in their home at all. They would use the communal ovens in the village or the town. They would pay a fee to do so usually. Or it would be an oven that was licensed by a baker. Like, it was the communal oven, but the baker had gotten paid for a license from the town to operate it. And so, that's what bakers usually were. They weren't necessarily people who made the food, they baked the food, which means people would bring them their pies and their bread, and the baker would then bake it for them. And some of you heard this before, but I'll say it again. We have court cases, criminal cases, where bakers were brought up on charges of theft and fraud because they designed a wooden table. Because the people would bring their loaves of bread, their raw, unbaked loaves of bread, to the baker and put it on this wooden table. And the baker would actually drilled a little hole underneath the table and a little slot that he could push aside. And he would go underneath, because it was covered in a cloth. He would go underneath, or have his apprentice probably go underneath, or his scullion, whatever, go underneath and pull out little chunks of the loaf of bread, enough so that you wouldn't notice it really, unless you're paying really close attention or maybe weighing your bread, right? But enough that he would then take all these little chunks of dough, put them together into loaves and then sell those loaves himself. And then we have not just one court case where this person, the baker, the miscreant baker, is brought up on charges of dough theft. So yeah, ovens were usually not only outside of the kitchen, they were not even part of someone's home. Yeah, everyone having their own oven in the developed world is a very recent development. And in Korea, some people still don't have ovens because Korean cuisine isn't an oven culture. Korea isn't an oven culture, not for baking. And I have friends who have very nice apartments, very expensive apartments, very nice kitchens. They have ovens, but they use their oven to store their dishes. It's a cabinet. Their oven is another cabinet. So I'm just grinding the cinnamon now. Remember, with spices, you always want to buy your spices whole and then grind them fresh if you can. If you have the time. I understand not everyone has the time to be standing around and grinding spices in a mortar and pestle. And the benefit of using a mortar and pestle, even in a modern kitchen, in modern cooking, over, say, a coffee grinder or one of those automatic spice grinders, is that the blades from the spice grinder get really hot really fast. And that actually affects the oils, the essential oils in the spices that give it the flavor. So it is actually much better to grind your spices in a mortar and pestle like this. I never had an oven in Korea, only a range. Yeah, the average home doesn't have an oven, right? Homes that are known to be rented to Westerners, they have ovens. Let's see, any other comments? Okay. So there was no medieval equivalent to Julia Child. I mean, not really, not that we know of. I haven't seen any records that talk about women, that name women cooks. Again, let me be clear on that. That doesn't mean it's not there. I haven't personally seen it. So if you have any primary source evidence of named women, not just that women cooked, women obviously cooked, that's not the point. And women knew how to cook, we know that. That even the ladies of the house knew how to cook, not because they were the ones in the kitchen cooking, but it was understood that if you were going to be a good manager of a household, for instance, you should understand how everything was done. You should know how to do it all yourself, even if you didn't do it yourself on a regular basis. So that's why the Ménagier de Paris from 1391 has all these recipes, because he wants his young bride to know how to make good food. Right? And he actually tells her that you should know how to make the food so that you know that it is being well made and that you can supervise your people and tell them how to do it properly. Right? So yes, women knew how to cook, but it seems that in all the records I've read, men are always the head cooks. So if you have evidence of women being head cooks in a great house, then let me know. I would love to see that. Not just that they cooked. Yeah. So let's see, marjoram and other good herbs. Checking my eggs. I'm just gonna put some more cool water on them. Okay. Handsome, what's the quality of, is the visual quality good? Should we plug in the Ethernet cable? Let me know what the picture quality is, because we're working on Wi-Fi and it might actually improve the picture quality if it is hardwired to the router. Things that a medieval woman never had to think about. Oh, goodness. How does it look visually? Is it a good quality picture? The 3 places you're watching? Okay, here we go. Our ginger is all ground. Picture is good. Excellent. Thank you, Susan.
We're getting good viewership, it seems.
Okay. Cinnamon is ground. Oh, I love the smell of cinnamon. By the way, and I wasn't doing this because in part I don't want to, wear a mask on camera if I don't have to. You probably should wear a breath mask if you are grinding ginger because it powders a lot really finely. You probably shouldn't be inhaling ginger powder. Yes, it smells good, but there are just many things that shouldn't go into your respiratory tract no matter what they are. And I'm confident that ginger or cinnamon powder is amongst them. Okay, great. So we've got our herbs and spices all prepared for this. Excellent. So now we are at the point where we're going to peel our eggs and separate the yolks from the whites. Oh, I missed some parsley. I'll set that aside. Unfortunately, I do not have any clay bowls here. Very sad. I am sorry about that. So we will have to use a metal bowl. Of course, I have a complete complement of replica medieval mixing bowls, which were clay. They were pottery. They were ceramic. And medieval ceramics are really, honestly, a consumable item. It was understood that eventually that ceramic bowl was going to break. Eventually that ceramic pot was going to break. And so, they were viewed from that lens. They were not viewed as eternal items. Like now we're all so sad. We're so heartbroken when, a piece of pottery breaks, a ceramic item breaks. But in the medieval world, it was just taken for granted that they had a limited useful life. So yeah, that's why we actually have in middens, one of the most common items that ends up in a midden, in a medieval trash pile, is pottery. Yeah, lots of shards of pottery. And that's how we have that's how we have so many extant pieces of medieval pottery. It's not because they've survived intact. It's because the middens were excavated and then the pottery was reassembled. And that means that some archaeologist, hopefully a puzzle-loving archaeologist. Oh, this one didn't break properly. Supposed to be, I'm pretty certain it's supposed to be nice halves. Oh well, we'll try with the next one. Of course, it doesn't say, it just says cut them in half. Yeah, well, I guess this is not half, this is 3/4 and a quarter. So one of half of this white is getting eaten, just straight up eaten. Yeah. So that's how we know how medieval pottery looked. Some happy, lucky puzzle master archaeologist got to sift through dozens of shards of pottery and figure out which pieces go to which piece of pottery and put them back together again. Yep.
Thaumacore said, picture good. Sorry, practicing the tin.
No rush, everyone. Oh, doing some musical practice at the same time as the lute practice. Very cool. So this recipe being that we've got these stuffed eggs and then they are cooked and then we pour basically an egg slurry over top of that and then it cooks. I'm kind of anticipating that this is going to come out like a kind of frittata, like an egg frittata. It's something that's going to be very interesting, and it doesn't say anything about how to serve it up. It doesn't say to slice it or anything like that, and that doesn't mean anything. Again, this cookbook was not aimed at someone who has never seen these recipes before, right? This cookbook was aimed at someone who clearly had eaten this dish before, so they would have known how to serve it. They didn't, why? The thing about medieval cookbooks is you don't want to waste parchment, which is animal skin and it's expensive. You don't want to waste parchment on unnecessary statements. So you can almost always tell what the audience for any given cookbook is based on what is included and what isn't included. And most of these cookbooks are definitely not a how-to guide for the beginner cook. They are more of a resume. Like this is, if you hire me as your head cook, these are the kinds of things I can make for you and your people, right? Same thing with the dance manuals of the 15th century. They're not intended for you to learn how to dance from it. No, in fact, I have a theory that they intentionally don't include enough details for that because they want the person who has read the book to come back to them and hire them to fill in the blanks. Perhaps a cynical view, but I think a realistic one. Yeah, so that's why these cookbooks, dance manuals just don't have the kinds of details that would actually make it possible for us to thoroughly recreate one of these recipes without, filling in some gaps with conjecture and or other sources.
So Owen all around asked, what was the average lifespan of a 15th century noble versus peasant?
Yeah. A lifespan of a 15th century aristocrat versus a peasant is actually not necessarily that different. So it depends on how you count average. So first off, your average noble man in the 15th century was a warrior. He was out on campaign. He was out dying of dysentery in the battlefield. He was out dying of sepsis. He was not necessarily going to live to be an old man. Whereas peasants were probably more likely to live to be old men. So think about average ages. You'll hear this bullshit rumor that the average age in the Middle Ages was 35. So that doesn't mean that by the time you hit 35, most people drop dead. No. Those numbers tend to include things like infant mortality, infant and child mortality, and the rate infant and child mortality was alarming in the Middle Ages. It really was. And even medieval people thought it was. They were not numb to the loss of their children. So when you start factoring in, all of this really high death rate into the average age, so you have all these humans that aren't even one yet. They're basically zero into the average age, and you count their numbers, then suddenly, the average age drops to 35. But once you control for childhood and you cut childhood out of the equation, all people who died in childhood out of the equation, the average age goes up into the 60s. And that's kind of true across the board. The Middle Ages is before the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution causes average ages to start plummeting precipitously because of factories and the kinds of the diseases of civilization, the diseases of industry that start shortening people's lifespans drastically. Also, the invention of gin really has a deleterious impact on lifespans across Europe, especially in the lower classes. So it seems that from what I've read, even amongst the peasant class, even amongst the artisan class, the average age was still somewhere in the 60s. So yeah, that's a great question. But I honestly think I haven't broken it down completely, peasant versus aristocrat, for instance, but I'm gonna bet that in the 15th century, the average age for noble men was possibly lower. The life expectancy was possibly lower than for peasants. See aforementioned comment about dying a lot in battle. The 15th century was gruesome for battle-related deaths. Not necessarily that they died on the battlefield in some kind of glorious death. No. Many of them died from dysentery, from drinking unsanitary water in the camp, right? Or they died of sepsis from their wounds after the battle. Yeah. Unfortunately, the beautiful death is not such a medieval thing. And actually, probably not a historical thing for the most part, not just medieval. Most people die of disease and or their wounds, which is also sepsis, so a disease. Okay, let's see, off topic, but was fish fried or mainly baked in the medieval period? I don't think it's off topic. You're still asking about the Middle Ages. Fish was mostly not baked, not very often baked, because ovens, most people didn't have ovens. You'd have to go and bring your fish to the oven to be baked. Fish is more often stewed or baked in pies. Okay, baked in pies or roasted. Yeah, fish is very often roasted. There's a lot of recipes for roasted fish. There's a lot of recipes for fishy stewed. There's a lot of recipes for fish pie. Fried, not so much. I haven't seen as many recipes for fried fish as I have for fish stewed or baked in a pie or something like that. But just baked fish, not so much. Not like baked, like you're thinking on a tray with some olive oil or something like that. Mostly fish seems to be treated the way meat is, which is to say stews, baked into pies, maybe spit roasted. maybe spit roasted, but not fried. Especially if you're talking about battered and fried, I haven't offhand, I can't recall any battered and fried fish recipes, which again, there are hundreds upon hundreds of recipes that have survived from across the Middle Ages, and I certainly haven't read all of them. And I'll be honest, if I see something that says fish, I read onward because I'm not a big fish lover. So my understanding, my knowledge about the details of how fish was prepared is slightly biased because I'd rather have eggs or land animal than marine animal. Yeah, there are some fish that I love, and there are some fish that I cannot stand. Yeah, fishy fish especially. But that's a great question though. It really is, especially because we're in the Lenten season. A lot of things are fried. A lot of things are fried in the Middle Ages, though. There's a lot of fritters, a lot of fried dough, lots and lots and lots of fried dough. They really like frying dough in oil, especially. Okay, so all of our things are peeled, and we do have a couple of sad cases. Sad. Yeah, so I'm probably just going to have to, this will have to be a salad egg. That's okay. It can be a salad egg. So the other thing.
Now and get rid of your shame. I could eat it.
Oh, would you like to eat it now? Okay.
You keep missing it and get rid of your shame.
And get rid of my condottiero is going to eat the broken egg now and eliminate the shame. So, okay, we're to the point where we have shelled them. Check. And now we have to cut them in half. Okay. So there are obviously, maybe it's not obvious, but there are different ways you can cut an egg in half. You can cut it in half through the narrow hemisphere, or you can cut it through the long hemisphere, right? And we're going to go with the long hemisphere, but you know, we're going to do that, but maybe not. Maybe I need to rethink this, right? That would be based on my modern assumption, right? Whether we should cut it lengthwise or cut it shortwise. So if we cut it the short way, then we will still have two halves. They will still be round. There will still be an empty space. And it says later on, are there any hints? It just says place the eggs into the liquids. It doesn't say anything about putting the eggs back together in any kind of way. So presumably we put them into the pot of oil as halves, not as, you know, something that's been squeezed, put back together somehow. So if we cut it this way though, it will be able to lay flat in the pan much more easily than if we cut it this way, is my suspicion. So we're going to cut it lengthwise, although I might play with the short on one. I might cut one of them the short way and we'll see what happens. In fact, this one kind of almost has to be cut the short way because of how the egg yolk white split. Okay, well, we're just going to go ahead and do this. Knives in the Middle Ages, kitchen knives, utilitarian knives like this, don't look very different from this. They look very similar to this. There's a slight difference in the blade, but they had a wooden handle. And I have a Todd Cutler replica 15th century kitchen knife, you know, chef's knife as we would call it. But unfortunately, that is also in storage. Yeah. So I have a bunch, I have basically enough equipment to make a medieval feast over a fire using only replica equipment. I just don't have it here. Egg yolk. Yummy, yummy. So all of these need to go into a bowl, but it says pound it. Pounding the yolks, right? So that's going to mean a mortar and pestle. So let's talk about the food processor of the Middle Ages, the mortar and pestle. So a medieval mortar and pestle were huge. You know, in the modern world, we have these cute little guys, right? They're so adorable, but a medieval one was massive. The mortar would be about this big. And you'd have a pestle that is human-sized, that is the size of an oar for a rowboat. And so that means that the person could stand and really put all of their might, all of their force of their body into the process of pounding these ingredients. And so that also means that you have a much larger container into which to make something like an entire dish by just putting all the ingredients into your mortar, pounding the living God out of them, and then it's all mixed. Unfortunately, I don't have a mortar or a pestle of the size, so we have to work with our little one, which means also that we might have to do things batch-wise, because I do want to use the mortar to actually do this because it says pound, and when it says pound, it means using a mortar and pestle. That's going to give you a very specific texture. Now, I could in this aluminum bowl, or steel bowl, it's a steel bowl. In this steel bowl, I could use the mortar, and that might actually work okay. It's also be a little loud. So I've got to decide, do I want to just put all the yolks in the middle bowl and just use the mortar, the pestle in there? Yeah, I'm just going to do that because I don't feel like doing 4 batches in this little tiny mortar, but I will use my pestle. So I'm just going to go ahead and put these yolks here into this bowl, like so. Yeah, I don't really have a lord and master. I'm the lady and master. I am the Contessa. I am the head of this household. Okay, 1 more egg to cut, 2 more eggs to cut. Oh, many more eggs to cut. Goodness, how did I miss all of these? So for those of you who have made deviled eggs, one of the things you may have noticed is that the yolk is exactly the right amount of yolk to fit in that space. The second you loosen the yolk up by mixing it, in this case pounding it, and adding more ingredients to it, you actually end up with more filling than can reasonably fit back inside the egg. So that is just the reality of stuffed eggs. And you know what I do? I just get a spoon and I eat the rest of the stuffing. Yep. No shame there. No shame at all. Yolk goes in. So we're now going to be taking our yolk, which is here in the bowl. We're going to be adding in some quantity of parsley. Who knows? And our other spices. And we will be using the mortar to pound the yolk into a paste, basically, and then mix it all together. And to hopefully muffle some of the sound anyway, I'm going to put it on these heating pads, these hot pads, so that it doesn't end up making a huge racket. Anyway, okay, take our shells, clean up a little bit as we go. Of course, in a medieval kitchen, I'd have a scullion for that. Medieval kitchens were, in great houses, were highly specialized, right? You had a person, the pastry maker was someone who specialized in just making pastry dough and pasta. The person, there was a spicer, right? Someone whose sole job was to handle the supply of spices and to oversee the processing of said spices for cooking, right? So medieval kitchens were just very, very specialized. And at the upper level of society, obviously, the lower you go down the socioeconomic spectrum, the less specialized it gets. But I'm talking, say, at the papal court. You know, the head cook, the person running the kitchen, would not be the person grinding the spices, and definitely would not be the person washing the dishes. Yeah.
Could you use duck or goose eggs? That's interesting.
Yeah. So you're right. So let's see. Let me look back at the Italian and just see. It just says ova, which is just eggs. So yeah. If you wanted to use goose eggs, you could. Chicken eggs are by far the most common. But yeah, you could use goose eggs, you could use duck eggs. We do know that they sometimes got ostrich eggs. That would be a real luxury item. I mean, that would be a serious luxury item. I don't mean that you could walk down to the market and just get an ostrich egg, like as a gift. So especially the papal court could have access to ostrich eggs, for instance. Yeah, so yeah, you could absolutely use a variety of eggs. I'm trying to think what other kinds of eggs would have been easy to collect in Italy. I'm not certain how easy it would be to collect swan eggs. I know, you don't fuck with swans. Do not, excuse my language, do not mess around with swans. Swans will break your neck. I'm sorry. I've had some encounters with swans in my life. They are violent animals.
Strong feelings about
I have strong feelings about swans. Um, we were walking around the Ile in Strasbourg, the little island that's in the medieval part of Strasbourg. And there's a walkway all the way around on the level of the river. And we're walking along. Oh, look at this beautiful medieval architecture. And suddenly there's a gang of swans. Yes, I said gang, and I meant it. There's a gang of swans. And they all at one, like some kind of horrible Cthulhu monster, all turn their long necks towards us and all glare at us. And they start hissing. All of them, like 10 swans, hissing at us. And they literally chase us off. So yeah, I wouldn't go with swan eggs. And actually goose eggs, depends on your geese. Geese can be pretty, there is such a thing as guard geese. So you might want to consider your life choices there. Okay, so we've got the yolks. We're now going to decide how much of our parsley to add to this. So I've got this little pile of parsley. This actually started as quite a lot of parsley. Many of you watched me chop it like it was a like I was a food processor. And so, I've got to decide how much of this. So this is about how much quantity of egg yolk that we have. And I think I'm going to put about, I don't know, a third of this into that. Now, this recipe says to pound the yolks with parsley, marjoram, and other good herbs. I'm actually just going to do a pre-pounding here. Just going to go ahead and just kind of get all the egg yolks broken up first. Just get them loosened basically, and then I'm going to add in my herbs and spices. And this could be, just because the recipe says to pound it with the parsley, marjoram, and other good herbs and spices, that doesn't mean that you don't necessarily pound them first. So just remember that medieval recipes assume on many processing steps in a recipe, they just assume so much foreknowledge and certain techniques or approaches that would just be second nature to them, right? Okay, so now I'm going to take, yeah, that looks good. About that much chopped parsley. And that actually looks like it's about, I don't have any of my good medieval towels here. That looks like it's about a 1/4 cup of chopped parsley. I should actually start writing this down. Okay, so far we have 10 eggs boiled. We have about a 1/4 cup of finely chopped parsley. Now, a medieval kitchen absolutely did have scales or could have scales. Good kitchens had scales, balance scales. I am really eager to get a replica set of 15th century balance scales for my kitchen. And we do know that they definitely used weights. They frequently used weights. They used volumetric, but they also used weight-based measurements in 15th century kitchens, because we do have some 15th century recipes, rare though they are, that actually have measurements. And in those cases, very frequently they use like ounces and pounds. So, but I don't feel like breaking out my digital scale right now to actually weigh that. So we're going to go with a 1/4 cup of finely chopped parsley. Okay, and then this is about 1/2 teaspoon of ground white ginger. No, sorry, ground white powder. A white pepper. Jesus Christ, ground white pepper. And then we're going to go with about a teaspoon of marjoram-ish. And we're going to go with about a teaspoon of summer savory, kind of ish. This is, welcome to Cooking with the Contessa. This is how I cook. And we're going to go with about, I know this ginger, and I know that this ginger is actually a little stale because I've had this ginger for a long time. So I'm going to actually put a little bit more ginger than I would if it were fresh, right? So I'm going to put, this is actually a replica medieval spoon. So I'm going to put about a medieval tablespoon's worth of ginger in there. And then we're going to add about a teaspoon of cinnamon. Right, okay, teaspoon of cinnamon. So let me just write that down. 1 teaspoon of cinnamon. Da-ba-da, da-ba-da. Ginger. 1 teaspoon of marjoram. And for those of you who are my channel members or my patrons or my Facebook subscribers, I will once again, I'll type up the recipe and I'll send it to you all. 1 teaspoon of summer savory. Excited to use the summer savory. The reason I have the summer savory is because I do Persian cooking. And summer savory is used in a lot of Persian dishes, especially dishes that are from what is now modern day Georgia. And but otherwise it's not. It doesn't make an appearance in very many modern recipes anymore. Okay. Says to pound that all together. Now, did you all notice something that isn't mentioned? Salt. Salt is not mentioned. So the question, of course, is then, does salt count as other spices? Does it not? Does it not need to be specified because it was just understood that you should salt things to taste? Or was salt expected to be something that would be added by the diners as per their own preference? Salt has properties other than flavor. Depending on the dish, it can impact the texture if it's applied while cooking. It can also impact how it impacts the flavor if it's applied during the cooking process. So this is a debate in the medieval culinary world. And I'm not up to date on what the latest general stance is in the medieval culinary world. If people are now leaning more towards one way or the other, or if any kind of great evidence has been found about salting while cooking versus not salting while cooking. If some kind of health manual mentions that it's common practice for cooks to salt dishes while cooking or not, something like that, right? It's going to be evidence that goes beyond the cookbooks, though. This is why pretty much anything you want to learn about in material culture, medieval or otherwise, but especially medieval material culture, is going to require an interdisciplinary approach. You can't just look at the cookbook. You have to read a bunch of other sources that are tangentially related to food culture, to health, to etiquette, to the history even that's happening, the socioeconomics of the 15th century, to really understand what's happening in this recipe, and sometimes to figure out how to actually make the dish. And it's not just cooking. Any skill you want to study from the Middle Ages, to really truly understand it and how to do it, you're going to have to look at more than just the archaeological record, for instance. Yeah. Okay. I, however, like salt. I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of salt here. Not much, because it can be salted later, but I do believe thoroughly in the idea of having some salt while you are cooking the dish, while the dish is actually cooking, to enhance the flavor, to make the flavors pop. You get to decide for you, though, when you're doing it in your own kitchen. Okay, let me see. I heard with meat dishes, as much was cured for transport, salt and often wasn't needed. Good point. Okay, so salting was absolutely a way that medieval meat was preserved, not necessarily for transport, because it wasn't necessarily transported, but for preservation, absolutely. They would actually have barrels of salted meat where you would have raw meat, uncooked, not smoked or anything, that was just layered in between layers of salt. And then the meat was taken out and it was cooked. And there's actually some recipes that specify that if you are using salted meat, don't add salt to the dish, which also is kind of an indication that maybe if you know the dish doesn't involve a naturally salty thing or an artificially salty thing, that you should therefore add salt. Yeah, that is a good point. That is how meat was often preserved. And I hate to tell you this, bacon. I'm going to break your heart, everyone. Let's talk about bacon for a minute. So what most of you understand is bacon. And I'm not talking about bacon rashers. I'm talking about streaky bacon. For those of you who speak British cuisine, streaky bacon, right, is pork belly that's been cured and or smoked, and it's soft smoked, right? It's not hard smoked. And then it's all juicy and yummy, and you slice it and you fry it up. Medieval meat was not smoked. Not like we understand it anyway. if meat was smoked, it was not smoked because it was being smoked. It was kind of put in the rafters to dry. And the smoke that was just part of every single medieval household that didn't have a chimney, which is to say most households, would contribute to the drying process of the meat. Meat was dried until it was dry, like jerky almost. So medieval bacon, pork belly, would have, if it was cured, if it was preserved, it was not going to be this nice, soft, yummy, melt in your mouth kind of thing. It would be dried until it was almost jerky-like. And then when it was time to cook it, they would actually put it in a pot with water and they boil the hell out of it until it rehydrated and the salt got cooked out of it. So yeah, medieval bacon, there is no evidence of the kind of thing that we now understand of as bacon or streaky bacon, for those of you who speak streaky bacon, existing in the Middle Ages. And they definitely didn't pick wood. There were no smokehouses. I have no evidence. If you have evidence of a smokehouse in the Middle Ages, and I'm going to exclude Scandinavia for that because I know nothing about Scandinavia in terms of their smoking culture. I know that they will cold dry meat and fish in parts of Scandinavia. I don't know if they had smokehouses, but I have not found any evidence of smokehouses for meat in France or England or Germany or Italy. So if you have evidence of medieval smokehouses specifically for smoking meat, that would be interesting. But I suspect that smokehouses are a product of the invention of chimneys and the proliferation of chimneys, because once the average home actually started having a chimney and the smoke started getting funneled out of the home instead of just floating all around in the home and vaguely sometimes exiting through a hole in the ceiling, they could no longer smoke the meat in the home because there was no more smoke in their home. So then they had to build a house that was specifically a hut that was specifically for preserving meat. That's my suspicion anyway, because up until the 17th century, most homes in Europe did not have chimneys. Chimneys were a luxury. Great houses did, castles did, palaces did by the 16th century, but it's in the 17th century when we really start to see the average home actually get a chimney. And that's just going to change so much about how you live your life. And you might not even think about it because most of us don't even have fireplaces anymore. But just how much having a chimney that takes the smoke out of your home and prevents you from dying of of all kinds of, or suffering, not only dying of it, but suffering from respiratory ailments from all the smoke you're just inhaling all the time. Okay. Let me see. I'm always curious about medieval Italian cuisine, Italian food before the tomato. It should be interesting. Yeah, so medieval Italian cuisine involves a lot more spices than modern Italian cuisine does. It doesn't just lazily rely on the flavor boosting properties of tomatoes, of the umami of tomatoes, right? So there's a lot more spices, a lot more what we might call sweet spices, cinnamon, ginger, cloves. Oh, cloves would be another option we could have included. Grains of paradise, cubebs, galangal, long pepper, right? Just so many more interesting spices in medieval Italian cuisine. A lot more herbs too. There was definitely a lot more herbs were used because again, you can't just lazily require on the umami of tomatoes to get you through. And there was a lot more stews and a lot more pies, right? A lot more stews and pies. Not pasta. They did have pasta. There is absolutely pasta in Italy, 100%. A lot of it, in fact, and ravioli, but those ravioli are filled with meat that are, once again, rich in spices and lots of different cheeses with lots of spices, lots of ginger, cloves, cinnamon, cheese, lots of cheeses used. But of course, I'm kind of on a quest to figure out just how similar medieval Italian cheese was to modern cheese. We should never assume that a cheese that is called something, say mozzarella, is the same as it was if there is a cheese called mozzarella in the Middle Ages, but I haven't seen the word mozzarella in a single medieval cooking source. Provatura I have seen, but not mozzarella. But we shouldn't assume that just because a cheese has the same name in the Middle Ages as a cheese might today, that it's the same cheese. Bad, an incorrect, an erroneous assumption. because I just did a post on this, actually. There has been a lot of innovation, believe it or not, in the Western cheesemaking industry, especially during the Industrial Revolution. A lot of new techniques were discovered to create a longer, more shelf-stable cheese, and those techniques got applied across the board, and they impacted the texture of the cheese, the flavor of the cheese, and also how the cheese will actually cook in your food. Right, so you just can't assume that a cheese that is around now is the same as that cheese would have been 600 years ago. So I'm on a bit of a cheese history quest, and there's a manual I found. Some of you have heard me talk about this. I'll talk about it again. There is a cheese travel vlog from the 15th century. An Italian actually goes out, a man in the service of the Duke of Savoy, is deputized to go out. He is ordered to go out into Europe and visit places and try their cheeses and write about their cheeses, describing them in detail. And so he writes this whole book about how cheese looks and smells and tastes and what it's called in France. He talks about some English cheeses. He talks about some German cheeses. He talks about Italian cheeses across the Italian peninsula, right? And so it's unfortunately it's written in Latin, and my Latin is not super great. I can kind of get by, but there was a translation done. There's a transcription of the Latin. There was a translation into German done and published in 2002, but that book is out of print and not available in very many libraries. There's one copy available in the Wellcome Library in London. And I have a friend, a follower, who is in the London area, and the next time he goes back to the Wellcome Library, he's going to go and take a bunch of pictures of the German translation for me, because this manual also talks about how to make butter. It talks about how to make cheese, right? So this is actually primary source documentation of how to make medieval butter, how to make medieval cheese. I'm just so excited. I'm so excited to actually get access to this thing, because German is one of my languages. So yeah. Lactinorium, damn it. Regimen lactinorium. I'm trying to remember what the original Latin name for this thing is. Pantaleone. The name of the man is Pantaleone. I shared this recently in my Discord, in my Creative Contessa Discord server, which is one of the perks for being a patron or a channel member or a Facebook member, Facebook subscriber, I think they call them. Okay, I can tell you this smell is really great. So as I've been grinding this in the bowl with my modern mortar with the pestle, the smells that are coming up are just really great. It's this really herbal yet spicy smell. Okay, I'm now going to go ahead and give this a taste. Here, show you. Look at that. Isn't that looking nice? Okay. It's amazing how effective this mortar is for mixing things really nicely and actually creaming them. It's definitely a very nice, rich complexity of flavor. Just got hints of the pepper, so that's nice. That's actually lighting the back of my mouth on fire a little bit, right? Some nice embers are burning from the pepper, the white peppercorns. I'm going to go ahead. I would like a little more cinnamon in this, actually. So I'm going to go ahead and add the rest of this cinnamon. Just because cinnamon is such a prevalent spice in this era, that I think I would like a little more cinnamon. The ginger is also saying hello. So that's nice. I just inhaled some pepper. In case you're wondering, pepper does not feel good in the lungs or in the bronchia. It's not in my lungs yet, but in the bronchia feels not great. Okay. I wish there was a way to like transmit the smell to you all, because it does smell so lovely. Oh yeah, now I can smell the cinnamon a bit more. I love cinnamon. Do any of you love cinnamon? I eat cinnamon sticks plain. Like I will just break a piece of cinnamon stick off and eat it. You can't do that with cassia, by the way. Don't do that with cassia. Only with cinnamon verum. Yeah. Yep, very nice. Okay, so something I didn't think about, something to keep in mind. Dried summer savory is a little stick-like. So next time this is kind of whole summer savory. Next time I would grind it into a powder or at least grind it up somewhat because there is no real moisture here in this mixture. Yeah, because we don't add anything raw to this mixture. There is no moisture in this mixture to kind of rehydrate them and take the dry stick-like edge off of the leaves. So next time I would absolutely grind the savory leaves up to make it more powder-like. Yeah, I'll make a note of that here. Grind the summery savory ground rather than whole. Yes, for certain. Okay, well, it's already mixed into the yolk, so it's getting used as is for certain. Okay, now we are going to...
Sad kitty was out there.
Oh, did you give him his food?
I did. I watched him eat it.
Oh, great.
To be near so I can make it.
We're renting an apartment in this little apartment building in Daegu, and most buildings in Korea have neighborhood cats. They have what I call communal cats that everyone just kind of participates in their care. And our little neighborhood has what we call sad kitty. And the poor thing, his jaw was broken at some point, and so his mouth just hangs open and his tongue kind of always hangs out. And so whenever we see him, we always try to bring him a bowl of soft food so that he doesn't have to struggle with eating the dry food. I'm hoping we can catch him at some point and take him to the vet and get the vet to fix him up because unfortunately, because of his broken jaw, he can't clean himself, and so he's really dirty. And he just breaks my heart every time I see him. So Ryan just saw that sad kitty was out there and went and gave him the food of pre-mashed fish bowl of pre-mashed fish that I set up for him. Anyway, okay, back to a happier topic than sad kitty. Yeah, we do call him Sad Kitty because he makes us sad every time we see him. He seems to be doing okay. I mean, he has his happy spots. He sits out in the sun and looks like a happy kitty. So still. Right, so here we have our egg yolk mixture, and now we will be stuffing. It says stuff the white with this mixture. Great, just like any deviled egg. And I actually am, doing it with a spoon. Nah, screw it. Fingers for the win. So what I'll do first is I'll make certain that every egg white has some, that every egg white has some, and then I'll go back and stuff more fully if I have any excess left over. As I said earlier, I actually anticipate having quite a bit left over, and then we'll have to decide whether we want to overstuff the eggs or just do something else with the egg stuffing. Handsome, do you think you could start working on the Cunard vlogs? Yeah, so what is it people love about deviled eggs? I think eggs are just wonderful anyway. And so I feel like people probably also really enjoy the texture. This is not that texture. This does not have mayonnaise in it. So, which I've always found deviled eggs to be a little bit meta because mayonnaise is basically an egg suspension. It's, egg yolks emulsified with oil. So you're basically you're taking egg yolks, cooked egg yolks, boiled egg yolks, mixing that into mayonnaise, which is in turn emulsified egg yolk, and then putting that all back into the egg. So it's like egg with egg with egg. This is just egg with egg, not egg with egg with egg. Oh, no, I guess it's going to be, once we do the second layer, it will once again be a meta egg dish. Let me see. I'm also curious about gruel. Did medieval peasantry only eat gruel? They absolutely did not eat gruel. Gruel was for sick people. Gruel was for sick people. Yeah, gruel was something that was fed to sick people or to people who needed their humors balanced in some kind of ways. I just recently read a meta study. Okay, so the question was, to be clear, did medieval peasants only eat gruel? Only sick people ate gruel in most of medieval Europe anyway. And again, I'm going to try to narrow that down to 15th century Italy just because that's our topic today. Absolutely not. I just recently read a meta study that reports that peasants, excluding the nobility, ate an average of 32 kilograms of meat a year. Now, that's nowhere near the amount we eat today. But let me give you a contrast. In Victorian England, people ate an average of 19. So that's a big difference. And once again shows how actually it's the 19th century when the real poverty comes around, not the Middle Ages. So no, the medieval peasants were farmers, by the way. I would like to make it clear, peasant is a job description, not a social class. It's a job description, really. Peasants are people who work in the agricultural industry, paysans, the country people, right? And peasants could be rich or they could be poor, or they could be middle class. It could be anything. But it seems that on average, and this includes all of the non-nobility, basically, that yeah, they were eating meat, but they ate a lot of root vegetables. They ate a lot of fresh herbs. They ate a lot of greens when they were in season. Not gruel. Peasants actually probably had a better and more well-rounded diet, better balanced and more nutritious and more well-rounded diet than the aristocracy and the wealthy did. Because the aristocracy, sorry, I inhaled a tiny piece of the yolk mixture. The aristocracy were eating luxury food, and luxury food included white bread. Yes, you heard me right. These days, whole grain bread is the luxury bread and the expensive bread. Sourdough is the expensive bread. In the Middle Ages, sourdough was not the expensive bread. Whole grain was not the expensive bread. Expensive bread was made from highly refined white flour, flour that had the germ bolted right out of it, which means that their bread had no nutritional value whatsoever. All it had was macronutrients, refined carbohydrates, and refined carbohydrates that turned to sugar in the mouth, right? So basically, the nobility were eating an absolutely garbage diet and lots of meat, lots of fish, but lots of meat, and not very much in the way of root vegetables or vegetables at all. So, and they didn't have much in the way of sugar or honey, not even the aristocracy. That was a luxury item even for them. But the white bread really set them up for failure, and also the incredible concentration of animal protein. So actually, the medieval peasants ate more healthily in general than their noble betters. Now, obviously, when there's a war on where you are as a peasant, life is going to suck because the armies that are fighting are going to come and steal all your shit and maybe burn your fields to the ground to prevent their enemies from getting access to your resources. So I'm not saying it was all a bed of roses. There were periods where the peasants suffered mightily, but in general, they actually had a better diet. Isn't that fun? Isn't that fun? Let's see. No wonder why medieval nobility were dying of gout. They hardly ate greens. Oh yeah, no. There's a reason gout is the rich man's disease. Absolutely, 100%. And this is something most people don't realize. Whole grains, because they still have the germ part of the grain, that actually prevents the carbohydrates from instantly turning into sugars. Right, so it actually slows their digestion down. Why is that important? Because white bread in the mouth basically turns to sugar. The second it touches your tongue, it gets converted to sugars. And that feeds the bacteria in your mouth that will then cause cavities. Whereas whole grains, including beans, beans with all of their fibers, or bread, whole grain bread, that does not all turn to sugar instantly in the mouth. A lot of it makes it past the mouth, not as sugars, and so it does not feed the bacteria that then produce acid that will then eat the enamel of your teeth. Also, it's more slow digesting, which means it's not going to have cause the metabolic load that white refined flour does. So yeah, whole grains are not just a question of actually having more micronutrients with them, but they don't always also have micronutrients with them because the whole grains come with phytic acid. Happily, fermentation like souring for sourdough, breaks down a lot of that phytic acid, which means you'll actually get access to those micronutrients instead of the micronutrients being stolen from your body on the way out. But that's a problem with modern bread. It's mostly not real sourdough. And so it's just a big, huge carb load on our bodies. And in the case of whole grains, we are actually losing nutrients, vitamins to the bread rather than getting any nutrients from it if it's whole grain. Yeah, the quandary of the modern world. Okay, so I now have, these are all stuffed, and as predicted, I have some left over. And so now I get to decide how we're going to go about this. If I'm going to just kind of manipulate these into being overstuffed or not. And I think I'm going to go ahead and just give each one of these little eggs an extra squeeze to really pack that stuffing into there so that it doesn't crumble in the cooking process and come out. Right, we want it to be as stable as possible. And egg yolk is actually kind of like food Play-Doh. It really does feel a lot like Play-Doh. And it's moldable like Play-Doh is. Like I could build a little egg yolk castle probably if I wanted to. Okay, let's see. So what's the recipe? I missed earlier, live just joined. Oh, okay. Welcome. Welcome, Little Southpaw. Thank you for joining us. We are making a recipe that is called stuffed eggs for monks and religieux, members of the religious community, varied as they were. And so this is actually a two-stage stuffed egg recipe. So here we have the initial egg whites, cooked hard-boiled, have been stuffed with an egg yolk mixture that consists of marjoram, summer savory, ginger, cinnamon, ground white pepper, all mixed, oh, and parsley, fresh parsley, all chopped up, mixed in, and then stuffed back into the egg white. Once we do this, we're actually going to, as per the recipe, take butter or oil and hot water, place the eggs into the liquids, and then mix raw eggs with the verjuice, with some other things. So first we're going to cook these in oil and or water. And so we have a choice between butter or oil and hot water. And that's a very interesting, set of choices, because our choice is between butter or oil, but in both cases we should have hot water in there with it. I'm just going to look back at the original Latin to see if that's true. Let me see. Put the other herbs and good spices and put that with the temper it with the mixture. Let me see. After doing that, take butter or oil and I don't think it's hot water. No. Okay. This is why it's important to be able to understand the original language. This is a bad translation, because if any of you have heated up water and oil or butter and water, or excuse me, oil and water or butter and water, it ends up splattering and you end up hurting, right? So actually what it says is take butter or oil and warm it up. And the mistranslation is, and hot water. That's a verb. That's a verb, not a noun. That's a verb, not a noun. That's a verb, not a noun. Okay, so we have to get to decide between butter and oil. And in my kitchen, if I'm given a choice between butter and oil, my friends, there is never a choice. We will be using butter, of course. Kerrygold butter, to be exact. Irish butter for the win. Yeah, so we're going to be cooking these babies in butter. Now, what it doesn't say whether we should put these into the butter. We should put these in the butter egg white down, or should we put them in the butter filling down? Right? It also doesn't say anything about turning them, about how to cook them. So we have to make some decisions here. I think that what this recipe is actually saying, what this recipe is actually saying is that we should cook these, and I think it probably wants us to cook them with the yolk side down. I suspect. But it might even be both sides. That we should fry them in the butter on both sides, and then we should add this mixture of raw eggs, whole eggs in this case, verjuice, in our case lemon juice, wine, parsley, and saffron, and pour this mixture above the stuffed eggs, boiling, cooking all the ingredients together, right? So I think we're going to go ahead and go with maybe both sides. Get a little bit of light browning on this side, some buttery browning, and then we'll flip it and we'll cook it on this other side. And the key we're going to be very careful about that because we don't want the stuffing to come out ideally, right? Now, the other thing that we're going to do that the recipe doesn't necessarily specify is I'm going to prepare the slurry, the second stage, the egg omelet mixture, basically, before we start the cooking. Because I think that basically as soon as these eggs are cooked in the butter, we should then pour the omelet slurry over top of it, right? And so I want that to be ready because I want to be able to focus on cooking the eggs and not be trying to mix up an egg slurry while the eggs are cooking. Remember, a medieval hearth situation, it's going to be a little more tricky to regulate the heat, and not impossible, just different, right? Because you can't just turn the stove on and off. You've got coals, you have fire. And so regulating the temperature is going to be a question of moving the pot away from the heat source or towards the heat source, or up away from the heat source or lowering it to the heat source. So I want to keep that in mind, that's the kind of hearth stove on which a 15th century Italian cook would have been working no matter their socioeconomic status. And so I think it makes way more sense to have the second stage slurry all prepared and ready to go so that we're not messing around too much with a bloody hot clay pot. Yeah. Clay pots, definitely the less you handle them while cooking, the longer they survive, greater their longevity is. Yeah. Okay, let's see. Yolk down, then the frittata. Flip it up when serving, it will be prettier. Oh yeah, good point. Ursula, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Yeah, I agree with you 100%. Yolk down, and then when it flips out, it'll be really pretty like this gorgeous egg frittata. Exactly. So I'm just now going through and making sure that all of these yolks are nicely stuffed, fully stuffed. And it looks like actually, somehow magically, I think we'll be able to get almost all of the stuffing back into these eggs. Some of them might be a little poofy, shall we say? A light little egg pudge.
Stick them together and make it an egg again.
I had that thought too. That it doesn't say to do that though, but I think Ursula's idea is a really good one. Yeah. That we basically turn this into a big egg frittata that then just flips out of this, looking really lovely at the end. That's the hope. And especially with all that butter in there, like it's going to be so greased, it should be no problem to flip this frittata, this medieval frittata out of this. Oh no, my sleeve. So there you can see the stitches came undone. It's okay. It's fine.
You need to do your sleeves?
No. I mean, it came. Tea with Tash, welcome. Lovely to see you again. No, you can't.
Oh.
You can't. The stitches came undone. That's fine.
I can stitch it back up.
You can, but I'd rather cook. The
The
stitches on my sleeve came undone. That's okay. That's easy to fix. And that is why, ladies and gentlemen, we make sure that the seams are weaker than the fabric, so that when the Contessa is getting very animated, as she does, that the stitches rip and not the fabric.
Contessa animated.
Yeah, that's right. The Contessa animated. What's the recipe? Little Southpaw. This recipe is called Stuffed Eggs for Monks and Religieux, is what it's called. And the person who brought us this recipe is Master Johannes von Bockenheim. He's a German who is working, and by German, I mean a German speaker of the Germanic area of Europe, because there wasn't a Germany really. There was a kind of a geographic area referred to as Germania, but it wasn't Germany. Anyway, he was a German working in the court of Martin V, the Pope, who actually ended the Great Western Schism and basically brought order again to the church, to the Western Church.
And there was much rejoicing.
Yep. And he's a cook, he's a courtier working in Martin V's court, and he puts together this book called the Registrum Coccinae. There's two copies of it, manuscripts A and B. and it contains a wide variety of very interesting recipes, all the more interesting because they're not nearly as sophisticated as many contemporary recipes from the sources that have survived. And he actually provides some recipes that he says are specifically for peasants. Once we get this cooking, I'll see if I can flip through the book and see if I can find you some of those recipes just to read them to you. But he also specifies various recipes are for people of specific nationalities, ethnicities. This recipe is good for the Franks. This recipe is good for the Alamans. This recipe is good for the Macromans. And as I said at the very beginning of this, the weird thing about these ethnicities, these are terms for barbarian tribes that migrated peacefully to Europe in the first couple of centuries after Christ. And so he's actually broken out these old terms again. So it's a fascinating work on so many levels. Okay, and I'm going to take this moment. Please like and subscribe, everybody. If you're enjoying this, you can just double tap the screen if you're on a mobile device. And if you would like access to lots of extra content, like the recipe from today in the original and my redaction of it after we're done, consider becoming a patron or a channel member on YouTube or a Facebook member. I provide access to lots of extra resources, extra videos, extra footage, extra primary sources, and I have a private Creative Contessa Discord server where we talk about all kinds of things, share our progress, bounce ideas off of each other. I share extra resources there as well. So yeah, lots of perks to being willing to give me your money. Yeah, access to my library. I have a massive reference library for historical material culture, and you actually get access to my card catalog for my cataloged library. So if you want to see what kinds of books I have that might interest you, you have access to our library, our digitized library catalog from my own personal reference library. I have a lot of books. Okay, so here is our clay pot. Now, I have dried it very carefully because I don't want any spattering. I have been burnt way too often by hot oil or hot butter spattering out of a pan. So this is a Korean clay pot. So it's not really a European clay pot, but it's very similar to them. And so we're going to use this because that's the best I can do right now. All of my replica medieval gear is in storage in Mississippi. So, well, it's in our house in Mississippi anyway, where I don't spend very much time. So we're going to go ahead then. Another one final feel to our little stuffed eggs. And let me just show you what the little eggs look like uncooked before they're cooking. I mean, so there's no reason. Some of you are like, maybe you're about to ask me, could I eat the egg now? Yes. There's nothing raw in this version of the egg. So there's no raw egg yolk or anything like that. You could absolutely go ahead and have a bite now. But I think you'd be missing out on a lot of the flavor because we're about to put a whole bunch of butter into that pot. And this is yummy 100% grass-fed Irish butter. So it tastes oh so heavenly. And then we're going to put these yolk down and the fat from the yolk and the sort of the few sugars that are there as a consequence of the herbs and spices that we put in, those are going to caramelize. You're going to get you're going to get the Maillard reaction, especially from the proteins and whatnot. You're going to get some Maillard reaction happening in the butter, and that's just going to boost the flavors oh so much. So you could eat it now, but why would you? When we're about to put it in a crap ton of butter and fry it. And then we're going to put on top of that a second layer of egg that's going to kind of turn this into one big frittata. And the mixture that we're going to make now, it's going to be eggs, verjuice, lemon juice, wine, parsley, and saffron. Right, so that's all going to get mixed together. So before we actually start the eggs to fry, I'm going to make the slurry, and that's going to allow us to talk about some fun things. So let's talk about wine for a minute. I found this fantastic, Handsome, could you bring me the laptop? You can unplug it. I was doing some research preparation work for this on wine in 15th century Italy. And I discovered something new about wine in 15th century Italy. And one of the interesting things I learned just before I went live is that there were wine snobs in 15th century Italy, just like there are wine snobs now. And they thought about wine in exactly the same way. This is fantastic. So I've got this quote, this physician, he was also he wrote a manual of health like so many 15th century Italian physicians did, Michele Savonarola. And he's writing about wine. And he notes that smelling wine is important, the bouquet. And here's what he says about the people from Padua. He says, the inhabitants of Padua know how important it is to smell the wine. They know it better than anyone because they always shake the wine first in the glass, then they put their nose to it to judge it. If they do not perceive an odor, then they make fun of the wine, saying that it is indeed a very weak one. Isn't that fantastic? Isn't that so much fun? Here we have evidence of 15th century wine snobbery. Love it. I love it so much. This is yet another way in which I feel so connected to the 15th century world. This does not, to me, it does not feel like a foreign world. In many ways, it feels so familiar. And that, chef's kiss. Thank you, Michele. We really appreciate you sharing how the Paduans were wine snobs in the 15th century. Good stuff. Oh my God. Yeah. So, thinking about our wines, I read another source that basically said there were they had all kinds of wines. And I mean a primary source, like a 15th century writer who just listed off all the kinds of wines that existed and everything. I mean, he literally says, we have sweet wines, we have dry wines, we have medium dry wines, we have smelly wines, we have sweet smelling wines, we have bitter wines, we have acidic wines. And I loved, he really did say we have stinky wines. And we've actually read in our medieval story time, we actually read a passage about how to mitigate smelly wine. If you recall, in the passage describing how to be a good butler, right? There's actually instructions for what to do if your wine stinks. Yeah, so our wine. What kind of wine? Should it be white? Should it be red? You know, they had different color descriptions, more varied color descriptions. They would refer to wine as being black or pink or golden or even green sometimes, right? But either way, the main difference, of course, is going to kind of be whether it's a dark or red grape wine or a green grape wine. And I was thinking that for the flavor profile of these eggs, of going with a white wine, because it's less assertive, and because there isn't a lot of cooking that's going to happen here, right? This egg slurry is not going to cook for very long. So there's not going to be a ton of time for the rich flavors of a red wine to really develop. So I'm thinking a medium dry white wine is probably what we're going to go with. Something I could have gone with a sweet wine, and that would give us something different. I'm kind of regretting that now. I could have gone with a sweet white wine. Damn, well, maybe next time I will. So keep that in mind. If you want to try this recipe on your own, the kind of wine you use is going to determine actually how sweet your ultimate product is. And remember that medieval cuisine doesn't distinguish so much between sweet and savory. It combines sweet, savory, and sour all in the same dish. And this one definitely has the sour. We've got verjuice. It's a sour. It's a flavor enhancer. It's got umami, but it's also sour. So actually thinking about that now, damn it, I should have intellectualized this more. I would go with a sweet wine next time. No. We need to get this show on the road. I'm just checking to see if I have any sweet wines back here. I do not.
That's red back there.
No, none of them are sweet. Right. So maybe if you do this recipe on your own, you might want to consider a sweet wine to balance the sour of the verjuice. But what we have here is actually a Pinot Grigio, so it's an Italian wine. Let me just give it a taste here. Yeah, it's definitely not sweet. I mean, it's not dry, but it's not sweet.
I think you should take another taste.
I should take another taste. So yeah, next time I think I would do a sweet wine. Yeah. Remember, I told you when we started this whole journey, I said, I've read the recipe, but I haven't thought about it too hard. Well, now I'm thinking about it hard. And I really think, in retrospect, I would go with the sweet because, okay, so hear me out on this. So then we've got the stuffed egg, which is all savory. There is, there's some cinnamon in there that, might had notes of sweetness, but it's not going to be sweet. So it's savory. And that means that that's going to contrast really nicely with a frittata suspension that is at least slightly sweet, right? That's good. That would be a really nice contrast. So definitely next time a sweet wine. Yep. Yeah. It was probably vinegar they drank. Absolutely not. Wine, Europeans have been making wine for a long time. Medieval wine was not vinegar. They had vinegar. Do you know what vinegar means? It's a French word, actually. Vinaigre. It literally means bitter wine. So they had vinaigre, but they were not drinking it. That was vinegar. They had wine that was, as I said, according to the people of the time, every kind of flavor you can imagine, but definitely they were not drinking vinegar at all. Not even a little bit. Maybe the more you drink, the sweeter it will get. Yeah, maybe. Although actually, you know what is an authentic way, an authentic medieval way to sweeten your wine? Yeah, you can add lead flakes. You can add lead flakes to your wine. It will dissolve in the wine and it will make it sweet. That is how medieval people sweeten their wine. That is one of the ways they sweeten their wine. Real unfortunate. Don't do that. Don't do that. Do not do that. If you want to sweeten your wine, honey is great. Honey is great. And taking that into consideration, I might actually do that right now. I might actually mix some honey into this wine just to make it a little sweeter now that I'm thinking about it. But you know what I'm going to do it in? I'm going to do it in my mortar, which has cinnamon powder, ground cinnamon still in it from where I ground the powder myself using the mortar. And so pouring the wine in there, it will loosen the rest of the cinnamon up and make sure that no cinnamon goes to waste. Okay, I did not prepare honey, so don't look at this ugly horn bottle out of which my honey is about to come. Don't look. Look away, everyone. I normally prepare everything really nicely for you all so that it all looks really pretty, but I wasn't counting on using honey, so the honey was not prepared. Okay, so now I'm going to, where's my mortar? The mortar. I'm just going to pour the wine in here. And also, we don't know how much wine, right? But I've made enough omelets in my life to know roughly how much liquid you might want to add if you want this to be solid. I think that this should be, that the wine and the verjuice are there to add flavor. They are not there to add bulk. And I don't want this to be a wine frittata. So we're not going to add very much. In fact, that's probably maybe more honey than I wanted. Maybe not. Yeah, I'm making this stuff up as we go. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and pour this wine here. And that's about 1/4 cup-ish. And now I'm just going to take my mortar and pestle and just swirl it around with the honey. And that's also going to loosen up and dissolve, suspend anyway, any of the cinnamon that's still in there from where I ground the cinnamon. And the Ménager de Paris actually recommends this technique for making, when you're using your mortar and pestle, he says, if you have a recipe in which you need to grind bread, first grind your spices and then grind your bread in the mortar and it will absorb up all the rest of the spices so nothing goes to waste. Fantastic. Medieval genius, right? Of course, I had been approaching my mortar and pestling with that kind of idea in mind for years, and it was so gratifying to see this man writing in the 1390s who had the same idea as I did. Okay, don't forget to like and subscribe, everyone. And so as I'm mixing, the wine is starting to get me a little drunk, the smell, as I'm mixing it.
She is that much of a lightweight.
Yes, I am that much of a lightweight. But I can also smell the honey. I love the smell of honey so much. Yeah, that's going to be nice. That's going to be nice. Yeah, so this is about 1/4 cup, 1/2 cup, maybe 1/3 cup of white wine with a giant heaping tablespoon of honey of medium dry Pinot Grigio. I should be making notes of this. 1/3 cup of Pinot Grigio.
Commonly kept by most families.
What was the question?
Chickens commonly kept.
Yes, chickens were the most common fowl of the Middle Ages, 100%. Lots of, yeah. Chickens were the most common animal because they reproduce quickly, they reproduce copiously, and they would actually geld their roosters. They would geld their roosters, and then they would let them, their baby roosters. Like now, we do horrible things to chicks that are, if their sexed is male, we do horrible. Don't even get me started on the horrors of the modern poultry industry in the United States. It's disgusting. But they, we don't actually keep our baby male chicks anymore because it's too expensive, I guess, to geld them. But in the Middle Ages, if chicks were identified as roosters, they would be fixed. They would be allowed to grow to maturity. They'd get fat because they're fixed. They're gelded, and that's a capon. And then most of the recipes call for capons because capons can be eaten young and tender and juicy, whereas hens are allowed to live a good damn long time and produce eggs. You don't eat a hen in the Middle Ages until it stopped laying. Right? So most chicken in the Middle Ages that was eaten would have been a capon. It would have been a gelded rooster, basically. Now you're going to ask me, is there a flavor difference? I'm going to be honest, I don't know. I haven't consciously had a capon, so I don't know. I'm going to assume the same thing happens to boy chickens when you geld them that happens to boy kitties when you geld them. I'm going to assume that their tissue gets very fatty. And because they're not laying eggs and not chasing after hens and not leading a very active life, that probably their flesh is maybe more tender than a medieval hen would have been. Now, would a capon these days be any different from the chickens, the hens that you get? Maybe not. I don't know. If you've had capon, and is it really different from regular from hen meat? Yeah, I'd be interested to know that. In the Middle Ages, it would have been very, very, very different. In fact, we have recipes that talk about taking a young chicken and an old chicken. That was one of the first cooking shows we ever did together, was basically a meatball recipe that is pork belly and old and young chicken meat all together. So delicious. God, those were so good. I have to make those again just because they were damned good. Okay. Nothing should go to waste. Okay. So we've got our wine and honey. Very nice. That's why I quit consuming animal products. Yeah, depending on where you live, it's a crap show out there. Seems this is just as much alchemy as it is cooking. Those medieval chefs were smart. Yeah, cooking is an art and a science altogether, 100%.
Cooking is an art.
What?
Baking is a science. Cooking is
No, cooking is also a science. You have to understand those chemical interactions. I am a witch. I can't deny that. Okay, so we're going to go ahead now and mix it all together. There's just one more thing we need to prepare. Saffron. Okay, so this slurry that we're going to make for our frittata involves saffron. Now, it doesn't say anything. The recipe doesn't say about how to prepare the saffron. It doesn't say to grind it or anything like that. We're going to assume that it's going to be ground. So I'm going to ground, oh man, I put the honey in the other mortar and pestle. I'm going to grind our saffron. And it also doesn't say how much. I think there should be enough saffron to give this both color and flavor. And yeah, saffron is crazy expensive. Saffron is the stigma of the saffron crocus. It's a specific kind of crocus, not just any crocus that pops up in your yard at spring will produce a saffron stigma. But it's basically the male reproductive parts of the flower. And it's so expensive because it is you can't mass farm it. It's not something that is mass farmable. And so you actually have to have humans that go and harvest it. And literally they have to go with their fingers and delicately and carefully remove the stigma from each blossom.
the last job that all humans are doing.
Yeah, it's going to be the last job that the machines will take from us is crocus harvesting, is saffron harvesting. the last thing that doesn't get that gets automated in civilization. So I'm grinding this in the mortar because I want the saffron to be evenly distributed through the whole slurry. And then I'm actually going to pour the wine on top of this again to get up all of the saffron that is otherwise kind of all over the bowl. See how yellow that is already? So the saffron will lend some flavor. It will lend, how to describe saffron? It'll lend an aromatic, flavor enhancing perfume to the dish, but it will also make it a nice color. It'll make it an even nicer color of yellow. Keeping in mind that medieval eggs were probably pretty damned yellow, if not bordering on red, the yolks were, because the chickens would have been free range entirely. They would have eaten everything. They would have eaten grubs, they would have eaten grass, they would have eaten mice, they would have eaten each other, they would have eaten each other's eggs, they would have eaten their own eggs, right? So they ate a very healthy, well-balanced diet because they weren't being fed garbage like a lot of chickens are these days, depending on where you live. Isn't that a gorgeous color? Oh, I love the smell of saffron. Okay, I'm now going to pour the the honeyed wine into here. And I'm going to give that another stir. And that way the wine will loosen up and dissolve all of that saffron that we've just ground. And then there will be no waste of this very, very expensive spice. In some cases, historically, saffron has literally been the same price as gold by weight. I'm not certain where it is now. I'm not even certain where the price of gold is now. But yeah, in some cases, it has been the same price. Deglaze it. Basically, yep. Oh, reptiles. Welcome back. Lovely to see you again. Are you a good witch or a bad witch? I'm the Contessa, whatever that makes me. Welcome to my medieval cooking show. This is not witch attire. This is 15th century Florentine lady at home attire, basically. Lady of the house at home in her private space, not dressed for public consumption, as it were. Do you guys know what is the most expensive liquid in the world? At the moment, what the most expensive liquid in the world is? Let me see. Mercury? Talking about by volume, I assume. Water? Yeah, right. Does mercury count as a liquid? Liquid mercury? Printer ink. Oh. You can tell we haven't had an active printer in our home in a while. Oh, wow, this smells so good. The wine and the saffron with the honey, it smells real pretty. It smells very nice. Okay, so you can see how yellow that has all turned now. Yep. Okay, yummy. Okay, so now, let's put that aside for the moment. We're now going to, and I'm going to do something the recipe doesn't call for. Yeah, why the hell not? There's just a little bit of the stuffing left, and I don't feel like I can really get any more into here without it being problematically fat. I'm not fat shaming my eggs, but I'm just going to actually just mix this into the slurry. Like that's kind of a medieval idea that you don't waste anything. Now the question is how many eggs? It just says take eggs. Now I've got about 1/3 of a cup of liquid there with the wine, and we're also going to add some lemon juice, which is taking the place of the verjuice. Talk about that in a moment. So I think I'm going to go ahead and do maybe 8 eggs. We'll do 8 eggs in here. What, handsome?
Horse seed, most valuable liquid. You grew up on...
Yeah, I actually grew up breeding horses. I grew up working on a standard bred racing farm. I used to manage it actually as a teenager, and I did in fact help breed horses. So that actually kind of doesn't surprise me. 2, 4, 6. Yep. I'm gonna do 8 eggs. 8 whole eggs.
You need to go get more eggs?
No, we're fine.
I should have bought 2 dozen. I need to go back anyways for us.
Why? What else do we need?
Eggs. We don't have any.
Oh, yeah, we've got plenty of eggs. Okay, I didn't use all of them. We have 5 eggs left.
So what a light snack.
Yeah. Okay, now, again, There are no whisks, as far as I know, in 15th century Italian kitchens. Now, I have a reference from the 16th century in England to creating a whisk using a stick. I promised I was going to do this time, and I didn't get to it. But to make this dish called snow, which is basically an egg and a combination of whipped cream and meringue and a Swiss meringue. To make this dish called snow, the instructions actually say to go get a stick, clean it, and splinter the ends into four pieces, and then to use that to whisk up your cream and your egg white into a froth, basically. But that's the 16th century, and that's England. So I haven't yet found evidence of proto-whisk being an implement utilized in 15th century Italy. If you have primary source evidence of a proto-whisk or a whisk-like object in 15th century Italian kitchens, I would be very interested to hear about that. And the proto-whisk, again, is literally, it's a stick, it's been cleaned, and you according to the instructions, you split it into 4 pieces, and then that becomes your whisk. That is the earliest version of the whisk of which I have evidence. Okay. But interestingly, look at how it's not, the mortar is actually not bad, but I'm going to I know for a fact that a wooden spoon is actually really effective at this, believe it or not. It is actually entirely possible to create a frothy egg slurry without a whisk, believe it or not. Mind you, I'm a whisk addict. I use whisks for almost everything, but it just doesn't seem to be a piece of equipment that was available in a medieval kitchen. Yep. Yeah, but I have, so yes, I have no evidence of whisks being used at all, anything like a whisk, even the proto-whisk before the 16th century. So I never assume, because just because it's possible to do something or feasible doesn't mean that people did it, right? In some cases, you don't need it, right? Why would you need a whisk? Why do you need a whisk, right? What does a whisk do that a spoon can't do? Right. And it could be, and it seems to be, that the dishes that are being made before the 16th century don't require the kind of volume or emulsive property, the emulsive power that a whisk would provide. Right. So just because it's possible to take a stick and splinter the end doesn't mean that people did. So I'm looking for proof positive, not just conjectural or plausible. Right. Yeah. From now on, I live in sandals. Okay. So let's see. Verjuice, right. So let's talk again about verjuice. Verjuice is the juice from unripe grapes, green grapes that are unripe. It is mostly tartaric acid, so it's not the same as vinegar. It has a different flavor profile. It would have a different taste, and it does have natural grape flavor. So it isn't just that it adds sour, it also adds an acidic sour. It also adds a little bit of flavor. Again, if you have a Persian grocery store, an Iranian grocery store near you, sometimes if the Asian grocery store is big enough, you might be, with a large enough selection, you might be able to get verjuice. I have not been able to find verjuice here in Korea. So the easiest, the best substitute, straight up without too much kitchen wizardry, is lemons. And so I've got some Jeju fresh organic lemons, and they're organic, so they haven't been coated in wax. You can actually smell the lemon just without even cutting it open. Ah, love it. It's so nice to have fresh citrus flown in from Jeju every day. Well, probably not flown. It's probably brought over by ship, but whatever. Thank God for Jeju Island. Thank God for Jeju Island. Dish bits, Dish bits says, from what I know of, 15th century Italy, they're definitely using bundle of sticks. Can you get me, what about the evidence for that? Like, from what you know of, do you have a specific source? So I'm sorry, everyone who doesn't know me, I'm a primary source person. I don't like relying on the grapevine. So is there a specific source you can point me to, like a cookbook from 1421 that talks about it, or archaeological evidence, or a visual reference, like an original medieval visual reference? I don't trust the grapevine. I've been burnt too many times by the grapevine. So I'm looking for the real evidence, not just from what I've read. Like, if not, if no, I hope I'm not trying to offend your knowledge, but I'd like to know how you know that. That's important to me. As many of you, maybe you don't know me, but I work only from primary sources. And if I'm working from a secondary source, then I count it as hearsay. So if I read, Richard Vaughan and his really fantastic and erudite biographies of the Dukes of Burgundy, if he doesn't provide me with the primary source citations for the things he says about them, I take it as hearsay because I want to go look at the primary source myself. Because as we just discovered in this recipe, there's a complete mistranslation from the original source, and it's an important one. He translates kalida as hot water, even though the word water isn't anywhere in there, whereas kalida is the verb, heat it up, cook it, warm it in the pot, right? So, yeah. Sorry, hearsay. I've been burned by hearsay so many times in the history world. When I first started doing medieval living history, I would go to events where there was a feast and there was dancing, and people would teach dances. And I assumed, so naively, that because this was a medieval organization and we should therefore be doing medieval dances. And so I just assumed that these dances they were teaching us were medieval. They were not. They were modern folk dances that have no connection to either medieval music or medieval dance. I was so angry. I mean, angry. I felt betrayed when I learned that these dances that I enjoyed so much had no place in a medieval reenactment world. I was pissed. And so since that day, I have made it my life's mission to only spread information if I've actually seen a primary source that indicates it. And if I haven't, then I say, this is hearsay, someone said this, but I don't have the evidence for it, because that's how betrayed I felt. Yeah. And I know that's a me thing. That's a me neurotic thing, and I get that. Not everyone has that standard of proof for their knowledge. But for whatever reason, it's important to me. Okay, here's our slurry so far. Very nice. Okay, now verjuice, our lemon juice. I suspect medieval people would have juiced these lemons by rolling them like this on the counter. Right? And a medieval counter would have basically been a wooden table that could be moved. And sometimes they actually covered them in cloth, depending on what they were making. They would actually lay out entire length of linen over top of the table. And we know that because the preparation, we actually have lists of materials for making feasts that you need in order to make the feast. And the materials always include massive lengths of linen for the counters. So it was actually a medieval practice to just cover the entire counter in one big length of linen, tie it on around the legs of the table, probably, and it would have been a trestle table. If when you needed extra counter space, you just set up a trestle table. And then afterwards, the linen could be washed and then it could be reused later, right? Fantastic, right? And that also means you can work directly on the cloth. You don't have to worry about splinters getting into your food or splinters getting into you, right? Okay. So, if you've never learned this technique, basically you pre-juice your lemon by brutalizing it, and it breaks all the pulp, and it makes it so much easier to get all that juice out. And normally, I would normally zest this lemon first because I'm going to juice it, but I'm actually going to be making honey orange lemon marmalade with only honey as the sweetener, and so I'm going to use the peel itself actually in the marmalade. So I'm not going to zest it this time. But pro tip, if you have organic fruit, which means it doesn't have wax on it, and you're going to juice it, I do recommend that you zest it first and then just put the zest in a little jar. And then if you want to add a burst of yummy citrus flavor, either orange or lime or whatever, then you have it. So zest first, then juice, but I'm going to be using the rind to make marmalade, so no need to zest in this case. Marmalade seems to have been invented. I know some of you are going to ask. Marmalade seems to have been invented in Europe anyway in the second half of the 16th century. It ties in with the rise of sugar, the massive burst of sugar availability in Europe, thanks one to the Portuguese sugar plantations down in Madeira and the Azores, and then to the plantations that are eventually set up in the Caribbean. right? So sugar becomes a much larger part of European society and cuisine as of the second half of the 16th century. And it shows teeth rot, are just absolutely rotting out of people's skulls by the second half of the 16th century and onward. It just gets worse and worse. But this also means there's a whole new culinary world that's been opened up, basically, because sugar can be used as a preservative. So now they decide they can preserve fruit by cooking it in large quantities of sugar. So that is basically the invention of marmalade. It's a 16th century thing. No marmalade in the Middle Ages that I have seen. I have not found any indications of marmalade in the Middle Ages. Yeah. So for me, the Middle Ages ends with the Reformation. That's my hard time. The second you've got Luther starting his own church and Calvin, that nutter, and all those other crazies running around Europe, right, separating from the church, that's the Reformation. That for me is the end of the Middle Ages. That's the end of the medieval period. But your mileage may vary. In any case, I have no evidence of marmalade before the later 16th century. And that makes sense because they were making it with sugar and honey. You know, you could say, well, they had honey. Yes, but they had no way to mass produce honey. Honey was still a rare and expensive item. And so you didn't have, you know, they actually had more sugar by the second half of the 16th century. Sugar was more available in larger quantities than honey was. So that's why no one thought, well, we're going to preserve this fruit in honey, because that would take a lot. It takes a lot of honey. It takes a lot of honey to make honey marmalade. Yeah. Let me see. Opera dell'arte del cottura. Dish bits. Interesting. I will check that out. Thank you for sharing that. Appreciate that. Maybe could you let me just write that down. Dish bits, really appreciate that. And I hope you weren't offended. I wasn't trying to insult you or anything. It's just I've been burnt. I've been burnt before. Opera dell'arte. Opera dell'arte della cottura. Okay. The work on the art of cookery. Okay, great, fantastic. Free-range chickens are just dark yellow orange. So they found honey in the wild, but did not actually keep bees. They did keep bees, but they didn't have large quantities of honey, right? Food production just wasn't industrialized like it is now. It just wasn't. So yes, they did keep bees, but they still weren't producing honey in massive quantities. Honey was still relatively a luxury item. You weren't just going to have, I could show you the ugly bottle. You couldn't just go out to the store and buy a half gallon of honey for $30. No, no. And it was seasonally available, right? It was only seasonally available. Bees don't keep going through the winter in places where it gets cold. In fact, they leave, as far as I know. I think they migrate, they go away. So yeah, honey was still relatively a luxury item because it couldn't be mass produced. Yeah, good question, appreciate that. Let me see, free-range chickens are just dark yellow orange. That's why the eggs would be red. I mean, by red, yeah. Let me see, although slightly later than this, Scopi, yes, Scopi. So Scopi, here's the thing, it's not slightly later. Scopi is writing in the 1560s. And if you look at his book and you compare the number of really sophisticated implements that he has to his kitchen to inventories of kitchens and the implements they had from the 15th century, there is a massive change in development from the 15th to the 16th century. Massive. So Scopi's work is not medieval. It's really Renaissance, early modern, in fact.
1570, Opera dell'arte.
Oh.
It's Scopi.
Oh, it is Scopi. Oh, you're talking about Scopi. Oh, right. Sorry. No, but that's not medieval. No. I mean a medieval source. I appreciate that you found an Italian source for the 16th century. No, I have read dozens of inventories of kitchens from the 15th century. And they don't have anything like the breadth of equipment that Scopi documents in his cooking, in his book. There is a massive shift in that 100 years between the 15th century, and this source is particularly the 1420s, and when Scopi is writing, there's a big development, technological development. Food gets even more sophisticated, which means they need even more specialty equipment to make it. So yeah, guys, you can never assume that something that's happening in the 16th century can just naturally be backdated to the 15th century.
Now, the thing they bring up there is, she says he refers to them as a traditional.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
what does he mean by traditional? And are you reading the English translation?
Yeah. So calling it a traditional tool. This is great. Thank you. I appreciate you sharing this. A traditional. The second you use the word traditional, it doesn't mean historical. And I'd have to look at the original Italian to see what word he uses. And the 16th century understanding of the word traditional is not necessarily our understanding of the word traditional. He might be using traditional to say this is what the people out in the countryside are using, but it doesn't mean that they were using it 100 years ago, right? So again, I'm looking for like evidence from the 15th century of things people were doing in the 15th century. Yeah, appreciate you sharing that though. It really opens up some really good topics of conversation about whether or not we should backdate developments or tools. You know, I don't like to do that. I only like to do that. I only backdate technology or techniques in the absence of any other option. So for instance, for every recipe that I have found, and I mean every recipe I have found in the 15th century, not a single one of them needs a whisk. It's not necessary. I can get the same effect or the effect that would be necessary in this recipe with a spoon, for instance, because none of the recipes require that kind of emulsion, that kind of volumetric addition that a whisk would add to it, for instance. So I don't feel the need to backdate it. But in the case of, say, hairstyling, if I can't find a chemical composition from the 15th century that will create curls, but I have a recipe from the 16th century that will, I'll be more likely to use the recipe from the 16th century to create curls than to use a curling iron, for instance. So yeah, my approach to history is that we shouldn't assume that things go unchanged. And especially not in the Middle Ages. People assume that technology is just so stagnant in the Middle Ages, that something that they did in the 13th century, they must still be doing in the 15th century. And my study of history says that's not true. You can't assume that. So which is why I always try to go with proof positive rather than conjecture if I can avoid it. Yep. So I'm still then on the search for a 15th century reference to something like a whisk. And I'm not saying it's not out there, I just haven't seen it.
Are you familiar with the Libro dell'arte coquina?
I'm familiar with the problem is that all of these books are basically called the Book of the Art of Cooking. So which one are you talking about? Which of the Book of the Art of Cooking are you referencing?
I think they're talking about the one that was published in 1465, Libro d'Arte Culinaria.
Okay. Yes.
I'm trying to find that one.
Does it, and do they, I can't, it's a little bright, so I can't necessarily see all the chats aren't necessarily coming in on my screen the way they are on yours. Okay, so here we have our verjuice, which is our lemon juice, right? And now we have to decide how much. So if we add too much, it's going to be really sour. If we don't add enough, then it'll be just kind of a little, well, we don't even know because we don't know what it should taste like. So I'm going to actually add about a tablespoon. So that's about half of a lemon. And I'm going to give this a stir. I'm not one of those people who's afraid of eating raw egg, so I'm going to give this a taste. And a medieval cook would not have been worried about eating raw egg at all. They just wouldn't have. Would not be a concern for them. Okay, it's a little sour. I haven't added the wine in yet, so I'm going to go ahead and add the wine. I'm going to go ahead and add the wine with the honey and the saffron. Now, we've talked about this before. We'll talk about it again. The medieval rubber scraper is probably your finger, but I don't want to get saffron juice on my white kombucha, and two, it's a textural thing. I don't want to rub my finger on the inside of this. So I'm going to use a rubber scraper, even though they did not have rubber scrapers in medieval Europe. They didn't even have rubber. They probably would have used a finger to get everything out. Okay.
they're not wrong. The first day is the bundle of twigs, but I can't seem to find a reference earlier than the 16th century. I'm trying to see if I can find it in the Libro article or clean up. That would be cool if I could find it.
Yeah. Okay. So can taste the wine. It's not overpowering. Can taste the saffron. It's not overpowering. I'm not tasting the lemon at all, the sour of the verjuice at all. So I'm actually going to add the rest of that lemon juice in there. So that's 1 lemon's worth of juice. It's a very precise measurement. Welcome to the 15th century. Okay. Yeah, okay. That has a nice tang to it now. Yep. So this is going to be different than a modern frittata, right? A modern frittata would have more of a creamy, in some cases literally a creamy, cheesy kind of flavor profile. This is clearly not supposed to have that because it has both wine and verjuice, right? It also should have some more saffron or more parsley, rather. So I'm just going to put about a 1/4 cup of chopped parsley into this. I'm really leaning into the parsley here. We'll see. I may come to regret that choice. We'll find out. I may regret it. I may not. You know, this is one way to get your veggies in. It's a way to hide your veggies. Do you have any family members or friends who don't like vegetables? Welcome to hide the veggies.
Evidently, a Oriental version was invented in the 15th century by Maratha Juko.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me.
And the process of making the chasen was a secret. That's cool.
Okay, so we're now to the cooking phase. So we have our clay pot. We're going to melt some butter into it. So it doesn't say how much, but I'm going to say it should be enough to shallow fry. I don't think it should be deep fried in butter. I mean, that could be not bad, but it should be enough that the pan is thoroughly coated and that after these have fried briefly, that when we add the egg slurry, it will not stick to the pan. So it should be pretty damned buttery. So we're going to go with a fair bit of butter here. Fair bit of butter. I'm going to actually say basically going to go with a stick of butter, more or less. Yeah. Why be stingy with the butter if you don't have to be? We'll start with that much and we'll see what we like. Okay. Okay, fantastic. Now again, there's no salt in here, right? Maybe it's a little too much that way. Yeah, okay. There's no salt in here. So we have to decide whether we want to add some salt to it or not. I'm going to add a little salt. The recipe doesn't call for it. Again, this comes to the question of, was it just standard practice for cooks to add salt? Therefore, they didn't feel the need to specify it in the recipe. Was it not standard practice? Was it expected that you would just salt your food afterwards? I always prefer to have the salt during cooking because then it's evenly distributed through the whole dish. That's just me. I will always undersalt though, understanding that not everyone has the same salt preferences. Right, if I'm cooking for other people. Going to let that heat up. Now, if I were cooking over a 15th century Italian hearth, I would have to decide whether I'm going to cook this over flames or over coals. And there are some recipes that actually specify that you should put it over a medium fire. And they really mean that there should therefore be flames. And you see this in visual representations of cooking, iconography of people cooking from the 15th century, that sometimes there's a pot in the flames with the flames licking up the sides. And other times the pot is actually away from the flames, but over top of coals. So that is how you would regulate the heat and also the directness of the heat on a medieval hearth. It would be based on whether you put it over the flames or over coals or even away from the flames. And that's how you would adjust the temperature, by moving it closer to or further from the heat source. It's actually cooking in a medieval kitchen requires a much larger variety of skills than modern cooking does, because you really have to know fire management as well. And you have to know how to physically make your cooking area hotter or less hot. And some of you might not know this, but in the 15th century, we actually have a depiction of a turbine-driven spit for roasting. It's a fantastic 15th century German woodcut, and it actually shows there's a long spit with some chickens on it, probably capons, that basically runs along the hearth just a little bit in front of the fire. And it's attached to an upright metal bar that has a fan on it. And so as the fan turns from the rising heat from the fire, from the hearth, it actually turns the spit. It's so awesome. I would love for someone to make one of these, some smith to make me one of these and then use it at a medieval living history event. That would be so cool, to not have to have a spit boy, to just be able to use the rising heat from the flames. Okay. So we have our butter. It is melted, and I think we actually have a goodly amount here. And I'm just going to wait until it finishes foaming, because it's still at that initial foaming phase. For those who don't know, butter has a tiny, tiny bit of milk protein in it still. And so, you know, there's actually just a little bit of something that can burn in butter if it gets too hot. And now that my pot is actually hot, it's a clay pot, so I'm just turning the heat off because the pot will keep going. Now, this recipe does not say anything about tongs. However, I am just not about to stick my fingers into that pot of boiling butter. It's just not going to happen. So I'm just going to place that in there like that. Like that. Like that. So far, so good. And I think we might even be able to arrange these in such a way that I know we can. We'll arrange them in such a way that it'll be really pretty, right? So they'll be in this nice fan, basically. And we'll put one in the center after we get the rest of them done. Put this in there like that. Right, food should also be pretty if you can do it, if you can manage it. Obviously, we're not going to get all of our eggs into this pan. It's just not going to happen, right? That's okay. I didn't expect we would. I expected this was going to be in multiple batches because I only have the small clay pot. But obviously, if you had a really nice big clay pot, which they had, you could really get into that. And especially in Italy, they had a lot of really interesting and greater variety of cookware than they do in the northern parts of Europe. So they actually have pie pans in 15th century Italy. They actually have casserole, what we would call casserole pans. Right, so there, and you can see them, you see depictions of them. So they actually had a wider array of cooking vessels than we do. Okay, and now it says to pour the mixture over the stuffed eggs. And again, bad translation, not above the stuffed eggs, over the stuffed eggs. Okay, let's see what happens here. I'm just going to try to get that a little more in frame. Okay. I'm going to put about half of this here. I maybe should have let those fry a little longer. I'll do that on the next batch. I got distracted talking to you all. It will still be fine, but I think it would have been better to let them cook a little bit longer. So we'll do that on the next batch. So now this is just going to cook, and the butter has risen to the top. Some of it has anyway. That's okay. We'll see what happens. And also another thing that happened, and this is something that we'll have to take into consideration next time, is on the next batch, is that because the liquid actually lifted the eggs up to the top, the whites are what's showing on top. So I think the yolks will not be visible at all. It will be the egg whites that will be visible on the top, which means on the next one, I might try frying them yolk down, then flipping them. And then the yolk will be the yolk stuffing will be the part that's on the top. We'll see. I'm going to cover it. This is the advantage of these clay pots. They have a lid. And there's a good reason that you would want to use a lid, and they had lids for medieval kitchens as well. Because if you're working next to a fire, which we would be, not a propane stove that burns clean smelling, it doesn't have a smoke smell, right? If you don't cover this pot, it's going to smell smoky and not in a pleasant way. It will just smell burnt. So there are multiple recipes that I've read that actually acknowledge this reality and specify things like cover it with a wet towel is one option, right? But you never thought about doing that. They actually specify to soak the towel in water and then cover the pot with the wet towel, acknowledging that the wet towel will not burn. And in that recipe in particular, it actually said to periodically re-wet the towel, knowing that if you don't re-wet the towel, it's going to burn. Right. There's also some that, the pots, we actually have extant medieval clay pots that have actually survived with their lids. So we know that pots could have their own lid also. There's one recipe I saw that actually said to put a board over top of the lid. So it seems that while some people maybe had pots with lids, other people didn't. And in the case of the recipe that wanted the cloth, they wanted the cloth because they did want evaporation to happen. They wanted some thickening of the recipe, the dish in the pot, and that wouldn't happen if you have a lid. So it acknowledged that you need to cover it to keep the smoke out, and the moisture would also help prevent the smoke flavor from getting into the food. But that by the same token, you still need to, you need evaporation to occur. Yep. Okay, so let's see how this is looking. Let me just stick my spoon in there, see what's, it's actually feeling kind of set already. I wasn't expecting it would take much time, honestly. I'm going to rotate, I'm going to shift this pan a little bit. So. Because it feels like it might be a little more solid here in the front than in the back. Give it a little more time. In the meanwhile, there's melted butter on this spoon. So even that little bit, the flavors are very interesting and very yummy. The different kinds of sour and bitter from the wine and the verjuice, the lemon juice, the spices and the herbs are actually really infusing that whole combination with a very interesting, sophisticated set of flavors. And I can, in fact, taste the saffron, but it's not overpowering. So that's nice. Oh, wait, sorry. I got behind on the chat. It wasn't moving itself. Let me see. Oh, thank you, reptiles. Appreciate that. Thank you for the compliments on my nose. I broke my nose by running into a glass wall 2.5 years ago. Long story.
Definitely not funny, and I did not laugh.
Yeah, sour and bitter are absolutely underrated. I love sour and bitter things. I like my fruit. Yeah, you are bitter. I like fruit that is not yet ripe. My favorite nectarines and peaches are ones that are crunchy. My favorite oranges are ones that are sweet, but are also so sour that it makes your lips pucker. Yeah, I love vinegar. I like my salad dressings to have just enough sweetness to make the vinegar not hurt, but otherwise, vinegar, please. Yeah, sweet and sour are absolutely underrated in modern cuisine especially, but they are not underrated in medieval cuisine. So many of these recipes rely on the flavor enhancing, boosting properties of sour and bitter. Yeah, it's really quite nice. I think this is not going to be, I think this lunch is not going to suck for us. I'll put it that way.
Yes. I'm so happy.
Oh, shit.
No, don't burn it now.
Okay, interestingly, it doesn't seem to be solidifying to the point where I can actually flip it out of the pan. And unfortunately, I smelled a little bit of burning, so it smells like there was some burning happening on the bottom of our thing, which is just the consequence of the clay pot. But that is absolutely something I've had happen doing medieval cooking in clay pots over fire. Yep. So this is one of those dishes that we'll also have to set up pretty thoroughly. So I can't just flip it out of the thing now. So I'm going to let it set. It's probably going to have to set for an hour or more. This is something where you could serve it straight out of the pan onto a plate. But here's the thing about eggs and the texture of eggs, quiches, any kind of egg pie. You always want to let it set up entirely. You want to let it cool to room temperature, and you can reheat it if you want afterwards. But that initial cooling after cooking is key to its texture. If you scoop into it too soon, you will break the curd, and then it will kind of turn into this crumbly, unpleasant, watery thing, right? And the liquid will actually just kind of all flow out and leak all over the place. So with any kind of egg dish like this is kind of like a crustless quiche-ish. It's a crustless egg tart. You want to let it set up entirely before you serve it. So it's going to be probably an hour or two before we can serve this. So I will, as always, take pictures and record my observations and maybe do a short of the preparation of the second one and what we do differently there. Unfortunately, I don't have a second clay pot that's available at the moment, so we can't do another batch right now. We have to wait for this one to be removed from here. But yeah. Oh, I love a good plum that's crunchy. It's plum season here, by the way, where we've got plum blossoms. Where did my plum blossoms go? Yeah, it's plum. These are little plum blossoms. We have the first flowers of the season here in Korea. So excited. Can make plum blossom tea for the next couple of weeks before we get cherry blossoms, and then I'll make cherry blossom tea. And then we'll have apricot blossoms, and I'll make apricot blossom tea. Okay. Let me just see if I can give you a close-up of how this looks now. And then, any final questions or comments? See, it looks pretty, right? Look at how beautiful yellow that is. That's what happens when you eat the eggs of chickens that lead a happy life. Yeah. So while I let you have any further issue your last questions or comments, I would like to thank all of you who have joined us here today for this medieval cooking party. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't. I would like to thank my patrons and my channel members and my Facebook subscribers for actually giving me money to support my work in researching and recreating medieval material culture. All of you who left super chats, thank you so much. All of you who just come to these live streams and participate by watching and asking the really good questions and making cute, funny comments. I love having you as just part of my growing community of people interested in exploring history a different way. Yep. So the next step is going to be to let this set, and then we'll do a second batch. I kind of smelled that there's possibly burning happening in the bottom, and I should have noticed that was happening sooner and turned the heat off sooner, which also might mean this is supposed to cook much more quickly, actually. But that's part of the experimental process, right? That's part of the redaction process. We have a fairly useless recipe, and we try to turn it into something useful through experimentation. Not all experiments are going to turn out well. We have a pretty good ratio at the Creative Contessa. So far, there's only been 1 fail out of 6 recipes. So that's not bad. That's not bad. And I have a whole second batch here that I can immediately apply any lessons learned from this first batch. So I will keep you all apprised as to how that has gone. Hey, I would eat all of that. You might not. I can smell the burnt. I'll let you know if the whole thing smells burnt or tastes burnt. Okay, everyone. There will be no live stream tomorrow. I have a crazy busy day. Tomorrow morning, I'm actually taking a hula dance class, and then I'm going to be doing traditional Minhwa painting, Korean folk painting, continuing my lessons with this wonderful professional instructor we found here in Daegu. But I will be live streaming. Oh, we're going to Busan. We're going to Busan. We're going for a couple of days in Busan. That is a beautiful ocean city at the very south of South Korea. And we're going to spend a couple of days there. So we will be doing some live streaming from Busan. I'll also be live streaming for my travels with the Creative Contessa channel. So if you're interested in seeing what Busan is like, we're going to do live stream walking tours of Busan, show you the fish market, all of that fun stuff. So check out my travels with the Creative Contessa channel. And I will be doing some impromptu medieval sewing parties and medieval story time from the beach in Busan. So stay tuned for that fun for the next couple of days. Okay, yeah, train to Busan, exactly. We will be taking the train to Busan, the exact train that you all may have seen in that fantastic zombie movie, one of my favorite zombie movies of all time. Okay, everyone. Any final questions or comments, everyone? Any final questions or comments? Once more, I'm going to take a moment to just sip some of my plum blossom tea. It's actually green tea with plum blossoms in it, but nevertheless, you can actually taste, believe it or not, plum blossoms actually have plum flavor. The first time I had plum blossom tea, I was shocked. I didn't expect the flower to actually taste like plum. And then I thought about it and realized, oh, duh, of course it's going to taste like plum. Oh yeah, very good. Good stuff. And there's only a minor amount of mess to be cleaned up. How nice is that? Oh, yeah. If you have any medievalist needs or you're looking for replica medieval items or medieval clothing, we've tagged a bunch of products in this live stream. If you click on the product links and actually make purchases, I actually do get a commission. So that's one way to support my channel financially and my work financially. But I do not encourage consumerism. Please don't buy things just to buy things. Only buy things if you will use them actively, please. Oh, and occasionally if you click on that link, you get a discount on your purchases. So I think, what have we linked? What have we linked to this time?
Oh, God, I linked a lot of stuff.
Spices.
Apron, spices, a
Yeah.
clay pot, kerchief, smock, organic teas.
I'm a big tea drinker. So yeah, Harney and Sons tea for the wins, baby.
Ooh, mortar and pestle. In fact, this exact, oh no, it's not this one. It's the other one that we got that's not here.
The other one that we have that's also not here.
Like 15.
We do. We have a bunch of mortars and pestles. Yeah. So if you click on the items in my shop, I do get a commission. That is a way to support my channel. But again, please don't buy things just to buy things. I discourage rampant consumerism. Try to only purchase things if you actually need them and will actually use them, or you actually want them, I guess. But ideally also if you only need them. Yeah. So appreciate all of the ways you all support my channel. Haas, who always reminds me to promote my channel. Yeah, so we've got Busan over the next couple of days. Expect some random medieval story time sessions and some medieval sewing parties, maybe even some medieval dance practice. And then next weekend, we will be back on Saturday, Korea time, Friday night, your Africa, Americas, medieval sewing party, and then another medieval cooking party next Sunday/Saturday, depending on where you are in the world. If you get a chance, if you post a comment under the video after it publishes, that promotes my channel. I hate this ecosystem. And if you had any questions that I did not answer during the live stream, I wasn't ignoring you. I missed them. Sometimes the live chat moves really quickly. If you pop them in the comments under the video when it posts, I will see them and I will answer them, unless YouTube hides them from me. YouTube sometimes hides comments from me that it doesn't need to be hiding. It's really weird sometimes.
We did questions today, though.
Yeah. Oh, Thomas Ashley, really appreciate that. Stinging nettles tea is a superfood. Yeah, nettle tea is really good for you. Nettles actually have some real medicinal properties to them. And actually stinging nettles were a medieval medical treatment because they would actually increase blood circulation. And so you would actually take the nettles and actually, if you had a trouble area, like you had a joint pain, for instance, one of the treatments was, like arthritis, was to actually take stinging nettles and It's going to sound harsh, but anyway, and beat the inflamed area. And it may have actually had a real effect because the thing that makes it stinging increased circulation, which may have actually had a therapeutic effect. How fun is that?
The
Right.
dish bit for the
Oh,
primary source.
oh yeah, Dishbit, if you're still there, really appreciate you engaging and providing your sources. Really, really appreciate it deeply. Yeah, guys, don't forget to like.
We'll add those to our library, regardless of them being out of period.
Well, I mean, I thought we had Scoppy. We don't have Scoppy already?
Do we?
I'd be shocked if we don't have a copy of Scoppy, although it might not be in the catalog. It might be at our storage at home.
Yeah.
Yeah, Scoppy is an Italian cook from the late 16th century who publishes this massive compendium of cookery in which he actually provides dozens, if not hundreds, of depictions of the kitchen equipment that he recommends that the sophisticated court chef should have. Mind you, yeah, you don't need all of these things. He was the first kitchen gadgeteer, as far as I can tell. Yes, I snorted.
The thing I like the best in the 1610 one, they show this hanging basket in the background. But if you look at it closely, you can see that he's just shoved the knives and the mixing spoons and stuff into this basket that's hanging there.
The ultimate versatile baggage or storage system. Yeah. Kindly tell Ryan to take the super cool serious picture on the train to Busan edits. Okay. We'll see what we can do.
We do have Libellus de Arte Coquinoria.
Yeah, we do. I was pretty certain we did. Yeah. Okay, everyone. Until next time, may your historical explorations be creative. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, everyone.